Chapter 1508. These chi condensation stage cultivators were naturally unable to detect the spiritual will. However, a wave of suppressive aura came from afar, pressing down on them like a mountain. Ah? Foundation Establishment Senior? All the cultivators felt their limbs go limp under the pressure and almost fell from the sky. Fortunately, the Foundation Establishment cultivator didn't seem to have any ill intentions. They were barely able to remain standing in the air and respectfully bowed as they waited for the cultivator to appear. Not long after, an early-stage Foundation Establishment cultivator slowly walked over. It was Qiayu from the Shanghua sect who chased after Xiaohua. Qiayu's face was gloomy and his eyes were cold. Seeing the embarrassed state of the cultivators, he didn't withdraw his pressure. Instead, he walked in front of them and scanned them with his divine sense. He said to a fifth-stage Qi refinement cultivator, "Who are you? Where did you come from? Where are you going?" Brother Zheng stuttered. "Junior, Zhang Mian of the Qi Mountains Zheng family is going to the Imperial Thunder sect to become a disciple to learn." With your cultivation, you want to enter the Imperial Thunder sect? Qiayu sneered and scanned Zheng Mian with his divine sense. He then disappointedly asked another, "What about you?" "Junior. Junior is from the Qingkuan's Mo family. Mo Mei, also going to the Imperial Thunder sect. Mo Mei? Your name is really nice." Qiayu almost laughed out loud. Mo Mei didn't dare to correct him and only shrunk her neck back, looking very timidly at Qiayu. At this moment, Qiayu suddenly turned his head and looked at the other fifth-stage Qi refining cultivator surnamed Zhan. Qiayu didn't say anything and suddenly reached out with his hand. That cultivator surnamed Zhan's body flew up, following Qiayu's hand gesture. He simply didn't have the strength to fight back as Qiayu grabbed his neck. "Say, Senior, save me." Cultivator Zhan's face turned red from Qiayu's grip. His two legs kicked in the air from time to time. At the same time, his two hands tightly grabbed Qiayu's hand and shook it with all his strength. Unfortunately, Qiayu's hand was like cast iron and didn't move. Mo Mei, Zhang Mian, and the others were shocked. They stood there at a loss, not knowing what to do. Then, Zhang Mian suddenly came to his senses and hurriedly bowed. "Senior, please spare our lives. Senior, please spare our lives. We are willing to give Senior everything in our storage bags." "That's right, we're all willing." Mo Mei and the others also came to their senses and hurriedly opened their storage bags. Bullshit. With a shake of Qiayu's hand, Cultivator Zhan was thrown onto Zhang Mian's body. Zhang Mian hurriedly caught Cultivator Zhan. "Does I look like a robber?" Qiayu sneered, but this sneer concealed his deep disappointment. "Scram." Qiayu berated again. Yes, Junior will scram right now." Mo Mei and the others were still in a daze when Zhang Mian pulled them over, bowed deeply, and then flew away. Only after these people left did Qiayu let out a long sigh of relief. Looking at their backs, he said to himself, "Xiaohua, this bastard. Where the hell did he hide?" Shanghua sect, Xuanyan school, and Qiqiao sect have been searching for who knows how long, but why can't they find even a trace of him? He couldn't have escaped thousands of miles away that day. If the Imperial Thunder Sect's elders took Xiaohua away, why didn't the Imperial Thunder Sect retaliate against my Shanghua sect? Why would they lower their requirements to recruit disciples? Isn't this clearly showing that this opportunity was given to Xiaohua to climb the mountain? It's already been several days. I met who knows how many fifth-layer Qi refining cultivators. Every one of them was like a mouse seeing a cat when they saw I don't even need to look at their faces to know that it definitely isn't Xiaohua. How could Xiaohua be so afraid of I? While Qiayu was thinking, not far from him, there was a somewhat familiar figure hurriedly flying towards the Imperial Thunder sect. "Xiaohua?" Qiayu's eyes lit up. Without hesitation, he swept his divine sense. However, when his divine sense swept over that cultivator, Qiayu frowned with a puzzled expression. "Stop!" Qiayu shouted and released his pressure at the same time. "Io, say, Senior, you." That cultivator, who wasn't very tall, immediately trembled in the air. He bowed and respectfully looked at Qiayu. "Who are you?" Where did you come from, and where are you going? Qiayu didn't relax his pressure at all, and asked coldly. Junior, Yun Jiechong, from the Su Yinyun clan. I was ordered by my clan to go to the Imperial Thunder sect to become a disciple. That cultivator replied very naturally. Su Yinyun clan? Qiayu blinked and said in a low voice, I and the Yun clan are very close. How come? I've never heard of your name before. Senior. Senior, please bestow a name. Junior, travels less and can't compare to my brother Yun Jiechong. I presume Senior knows my brother's name? That cultivator quickly said, I am Shanghua sect's disciple Qiayu. Qiayu said, I heard Xuanyan School's disciples tell I that your brother just entered Xuanyan School with a 10th layer Qi refining cultivation. Congratulations. Xuanyan School? That cultivator was stunned and said somewhat embarrassedly, Senior Qia, please know that Yun Jiechong is Junior's clan brother. He only has a 9th layer Qi refining cultivation. Junior isn't from the main branch and can't compare to my clan brother. Also, my clan brother didn't enter Xuanyan School but Huanhua sect. Xiaohua, Qiayu suddenly looked at that cultivator and called out. That cultivator didn't have any reaction and looked at Qiayu with some surprise. Then he looked around and said in a low voice, Senior, this is, it's nothing. Qiayu said with a smile, That's right, your clan brother only entered Huanhua sect when he was at the 9th layer Qi refining stage. You're at the middle stage of the 7th layer Qi refining stage. How can you enter the Imperial Thunder sect? Are you confident? That cultivator smiled bitterly. I also don't think I'm confident. However, the clan head thinks it's just an opportunity. Maybe this is Junior's opportunity. That's why he asked Junior to come. That's right. Do you want to enter my Shanghua sect? Qiayu said with a smile. Really? That cultivator's face was filled with pleasant surprise. He seemed to be enlightened and was about to kowtow and called Qiayu master. Who would have thought that just as he was about to kneel down, a huge force would bind him firmly, causing him to be unable to move at all. Moss. That cultivator didn't even have time to say the word master before his mouth was filled with wind and he couldn't say a single word. Qiayu had already flown away and said while flying, My Shanghua sect's disciples are all at the 10th layer Qi refining stage. You still need to cultivate for a few more years. This old man still has things to do. You should go to the Imperial Thunder sect. Senior. That cultivator's face was filled with disappointment. He chased after Qiayu for a while before resentfully stopping. Then he reluctantly flew towards Liamo mountain range. While flying, he glanced back several times, appearing extremely reluctant to part. Only after flying for several dozen li did that cultivator lower his head. He coldly snorted and said in a low voice, Qiayu, oh Qiayu, you want to play tricks with me? When I was at the 5th layer Qi refining stage, I wasn't afraid of you. Now that I'm at the 10th layer Qi refining stage, flying to Liamo mountain range from right in front of your eyes is as easy as blowing off dust. Why would I be afraid of you? Soon after, the cultivator's height slowly increased, and his very handsome face also slowly changed. In the end, he actually turned into Xiaohua's appearance. Moreover, Xiaohua's cultivation also increased bit by bit, all the way until he reached the 10th level of Qi refining before stopping. That's right, this cultivator was Xiaohua, the Xiaohua who just came out of seclusion underground. In the past 2 years, Xiaohua didn't take a single step out of his seclusion place. On one hand, he was afraid of being found by the Shanghua sect, Xuanyan School, and Qiqiao sect. On the other hand, this was a rare opportunity for him to cultivate. Not only did he have the heavenly law embodiment technique, he also had the fire marrow flame crystal in his meridians. In these 2 years, Xiaohua actually inconceivably cultivated from the middle of the 5th layer Qi refining stage all the way to the middle of the 10th layer Qi refining stage. Moreover, there was still a very small amount of fire marrow flame crystal in his meridians that hadn't been refined yet. If he could completely refine it, he could directly reach the 11th layer Qi refining stage. Xiaohua naturally wanted to continue cultivating, but he had no choice but to come out of seclusion. This was because the restriction placed by Qian Qinghua in his meridians had already loosened. Qian Qinghua was also amazing. The restriction placed on the clear flower pill's medicinal power was also genuine. This restriction actually didn't loosen at all under the fire marrow flame crystal's flame in the dragon transformation art circulation. Only when Qinqing's 2-year deadline was approaching did the restriction slowly start to loosen. After seeing the fire marrow flame crystal's fire attribute spiritual energy and thinking about Qinqing's words, Xiaohua didn't doubt that if the clear flower pill's medicinal power was completely released, his meridians wouldn't be able to withstand it. One had to know that Qinqing's restriction was undamaged by the flame. With such a powerful restriction protecting the clear flower pill's medicinal power, how could the medicinal power be simple? Of course, the fire marrow flame crystal was an ancient cultivation item. Perhaps the clear flower pill couldn't compare. However, only 10% of the fire marrow flame crystal's fire attribute spiritual energy was used by Xiaohua. The rest was divided equally between Xiaohua's body, meridians, and bones. Thinking about the possibility of his meridians exploding and dying, Xiaohua trembled with fear and didn't hesitate to come out of seclusion. The news of the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple recruitment had spread throughout the entire country of Xi. Xiaohua only found out about it in the tea houses and wine shops very easily. If Qiaoyu could guess it, how could Xiaohua not know? This opportunity was definitely created for him. Since the Imperial Thunder Sect did this, they must have their own difficulties. In other words, Qianhua Sect, Xuanyan School, and Qiqiao Sect would set up a defensive line around the Imperial Thunder Sect's mountain gate to prevent him from entering the Mount Lama. However, Xiaohua naturally had his own methods. In these 2 years, whether it was Kai Zhuoxia's stealing the sky or the corresponding crossing the sea by deceiving the heavens, Xiaohua was extremely familiar with them. Now, not only could he change the appearance of his face, he could also barely shorten his height. With only cultivation, it was even simpler. Xiaohua didn't need to reduce his cultivation too much. Just the late stage of the 7th level of qi refining was enough to make Qiaoyu think that he was Xiaohua. After all, using 2 years to go from the middle stage of the 5th level of qi refining to the late stage of the 7th level of qi refining was already inconceivable for a rogue cultivator. As for why Xiaohua didn't use his original cultivation at the late stage of the 10th level of qi refining, was there even a need to say it? Qiaoyu had heard of the 9th level of qi refining, so how could a random 10th level qi refining cultivator come out of nowhere? -6. Chapter 1509. Meanwhile, Xiaohua was slowly flying towards Lama mountain range. While flying, he was slowly recovering his cultivation and slowly changing his face back to his original appearance. Seeing that Lama mountain range was already in front of him, Xiaohua naturally saw the difference in the location of Imperial Thunder School. My goodness, why is the color of Lama mountain range purplish-red? It's actually similar to Flame Forest Marsh's fiery red color. Could it be that there's also underground magma under Lama mountain range? But Lama mountain range's climate is mild, flowers and plants are everywhere, and green trees provide shade. It's not comparable to Flame Forest Marsh's Shuazhua Tong Mountain. Mother. While Xiaohua was secretly pondering, Xiaohuang's voice suddenly sounded in his heart. Xiaohuang, how are you these days? Xiaohua was now accustomed to speaking to Xiaohuang attentively. Hearing Xiaohuang's voice, his face showed surprise and asked. 2 years ago, Goldie was already on the verge of death, but it was also strange. Ever since Xiaohua sent Goldie into the space, under the illumination of the reverse light, not only did Goldie not die as the Empress expected, but it also gradually recovered its vitality. Of course, this kind of recovery was very slow. In these 2 years, Xiaohuang was only able to preserve his life. If he wanted to return to his previous speed, it was still too far away. Mother. Very, very good. Here. It's really warm. Xiaohuang was somewhat gasping for breath. He couldn't even speak clearly. However, his tone was filled with endless joy. It seemed that as long as he was together with Xiaohua, it was the happiest thing in the world. Your body is still weak. You should cultivate first. Xiaohua said with heartache. Yes, mother. Xiaohuang was very obedient. He lay on his back, and as if he was basking in the sun, he instinctively breathed in reverse light. Right, mother? Little Black, did you find it? Xiao Huang suddenly asked. Xiao Hua scratched his head and said awkwardly, no, not yet, and Xiao Huang was like a child. He had incomparable trust in his mother. He only felt that his mother was the greatest person in this world. If Xiao Hua said there was no, then there was no. He also believed that his mother must be painstakingly searching for it. Xiao Huang, it's not that mother doesn't want to look for its mother. I can't remember what little black is. Could it be a little black sable like you? Xiao Hua was speechless. Although Goldie's life was saved, it needed time to recover. Moreover, Goldie was only a little beast. It only knew that Little Black was Little Black, but it couldn't say what Little Black was. Xiao Hua even tried to ask Goldie about his past. Unfortunately, Goldie was involved in Xiao Hua's past and knew many things about Xiao Hua, but Goldie couldn't express it. I can only assume that Little Yellow is a taciturn person, Xiao Hua thought and raised his left hand. Looking at the crack in his left hand, he thought, good, Little Yellow's forehead has an eye. Could it be that this young master's left hand also has an eye? But why was Little Yellow able to open his eyes, but yours truly couldn't even feel anything at all? Hee. What's the use of having an eye on your hand? However, this young master's past experience, I'm really looking forward to it. Xiao Hua's eyes looked at the Layamo mountain range in front of him. Indeed, in 2 years, from the 5th level of Qi refining, no, it should be from the middle of the 4th level of Qi refining all the way to the late of the 10th level of Qi refining. This kind of thing should be extremely rare in the cultivation world. According to common sense, from the 4th level of Qi refining to the 10th level of Qi refining, it should take close to 30 years. Even if it was a peerless talent, such as Li Zongbao, it would still take close to 10 years of hard work. How could it be heard that someone could achieve it in 2 years? Especially 2 years ago. He was still an 18 years old loose cultivator? Kai Zhuoxia said that there were bottlenecks in the middle of every level. I didn't encounter any of them. It seems that this can only happen when one's level is high enough and their magic power is insufficient. In that case, I was already at the peak of Qi refining before? But that so-called empress, didn't she say that she also didn't find any abnormalities in I? She's a cultivator with great magical powers. Come to think of it, thinking of this, Xiao Hua frowned again. That heavenly laws embodiment technique seems to have some problems. This technique is admittedly a genuine Qi refining technique, but the essence seems to be leaning towards body cultivation. Moreover, in some key areas, there are traces of blood shadow technique from time to time. If it wasn't for this young master being proficient in the blood shadow technique, this young master would really have fallen for it. Could it be that mysterious cultivator who wanted to obtain the mother-child spirit fruit is someone from the devil realm? It's extremely possible. Didn't the Forsaken Heaven sect have 3 initiators? Qing Fengmin and Luo Jiasen are 2. Then what about the third person? If it wasn't that little blood shadow on the Thousand Zhang Peak, then it must be someone else. Himph. You actually took this young master's spirit fruit and even plotted against this young master. If this young master has the chance in the future, this young master will definitely make you suffer a little. Forget it. The higher my cultivation, the more certain this young master will be to take revenge on the 100 Herbs Gate. Damn it, Jiang Jiantong, just you wait. Xiao Hua's eyes flashed with a trace of severity. Xiao Hua. Just as Xiao Hua was venting his anger, someone behind him suddenly cried out in surprise. When Xiao Hua heard this, he couldn't help but feel his hair stand on end. He didn't dare to look back and urged his flight technique to flee towards the Thunderamo mountain range. However, that person continued to say, "Oh, sorry, fellow Taoist, I recognized the wrong person." Xiao Hua stared blankly, inwardly saying, "This voice seems very familiar. Is it a female cultivator that this young master knows?" Shue. Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Before he turned his head, he recalled the set of magic tools that Ling Zhengyi maliciously gave him in the space. "Fellow Taoist Shue, long time no see. How are you now?" Xiao Hua turned his head and asked very warmly with a smile on his face. Xiao Hua. Shue's shock was even greater than before. Previously, she only felt that Xiao Hua's tall and thin figure was somewhat familiar. However, when she saw that Xiao Hua's cultivation was at the 10th layer of qi refining, she immediately realized that she recognized the wrong person. However, now that she really saw Xiao Hua turn around, she confirmed that this late-stage 10th layer qi refining cultivator was really the same Xiao Hua who was at the 4th layer of qi refining. Her eyes were wide open. One hand covered her cherry lips while the other hand was slightly raised and placed on her towering and violently shaking chest. What? We haven't seen each other for only 2 years and fellow Taoist Shui has already forgotten I? Xiao Hua narrowed his eyes as if he was looking at Shue's shocked face. He also seemed to be looking at Shue's snow-white chest and asked with interest. No, no. Shui realized her rudeness. She took a deep breath, bit her lips, and bowed respectfully. How could I forget fellow Taoist Xiao? Didn't I just greet fellow Taoist Xiao from afar? Hee, that's good. Xiao Hua looked at Shui, who was still at the 8th level of qi refining, and said with a nod, Fellow Taoist Shui, since you've come here, do you also want to enter the Imperial Thunder Sect? Of course. Shui took a deep breath again, and a trace of strangeness flashed through her eyes. She said with a smile, those who came to the Imperial Thunder Sect these past few days, other than to enter the Imperial Thunder Sect and learn martial arts, what else can they do? Xiao Hua nodded non-committally. That, fellow Taoist Xiao. Shui hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, previously, my Misty Mountain, if there was anything we did wrong, I hope fellow Taoist Xiao can forgive us? Fellow Taoist Shui, what do you mean? Xiao Hua's eyes turned and he said with a smile, when I's cultivation fell, fellow Taoist Shui helped me. Now that I's cultivation has completely recovered, fellow Taoist Shui also contributed. I don't even have enough time to thank you, so how can I forgive you? This, Shui's face was a bit unnatural as she said in a low voice, I was talking about Misty Mountain. Ha ha ha, so fellow Taoist Shui was talking about your uncle. Xiao Hua suddenly understood. Senior Ling thought highly of me and gave me a fake magic tool refined by the Misty Mountain, so of course I am grateful. What's there to forgive? Shui sighed and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, with your cultivation, you really hit it for me a few days ago. If my Misty Mountain has done anything inappropriate, I hope that fellow Taoist Xiao can take into account the fact that you and this poor Taoist are connected by incense and incense. Forgive us. Fellow Taoist Shui's words are getting more and more outrageous. I am really confused. Xiao Hua pretended not to know. It's nothing. Shui raised her head and said with a smile, with fellow Taoist Zhao's cultivation, you definitely have a deep background. Moreover, you came to Sky Thunder Peak this time with full confidence, so the identity of a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. I'm afraid you can't run away. I will greet fellow Taoist Xiao in advance. If fellow Taoist Xiao becomes a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect in the future, it will be too late to talk. Xiao Hua naturally understood what Shui was talking about, but he had already made up his mind not to return the magic tool, so how could he admit it? However, after hearing Shui's words, his heart was moved. He came to the Thunder Mountain Range with the intention of returning the bead to the Imperial Thunder Sect, and then asked the seniors of the Imperial Thunder Sect to refine the medicinal efficacy of the clear flower pill. He never thought about joining the Imperial Thunder Sect. At this time, he couldn't help but think, that's right, this young master is originally a loose cultivator. I've already cultivated the Heavenly Laws embodiment technique to the 10th layer of the qi refining realm. With 2 more layers, the remaining flame in my meridians and the medicinal efficacy of the clear flower pill will be enough to cultivate to the peak of the qi refining realm. At that time, wouldn't this young master have no more techniques to cultivate? Joining the Imperial Thunder Sect is actually a good path. Fellow Taoist Xiao? Seeing Xiao Hua deep in thought, Shui was a little nervous. She looked around and saw many cultivators rushing over and called out. Xiao Hua raised his head and said with a smile, some things are not good to be too obvious. I don't think I'm a meddlesome person, and I presume Senior Ling is also like this. If some things, Senior Ling can forget, and fellow Taoist Shui can never mention it again, I think. That would be the best. -6. Chapter 15:10. Hearing Xiao Hua's words, Xue Xue's heart calmed down. She stared deeply at Xiao Hua and cupped her hands. Fellow Taoist Xiao is so broad-minded. I really admire you. Is that so? Xiao Hua smiled. Why didn't I feel it myself? Xue Xue didn't know that Xiao Hua had already understood Ling Jingyi's thoughts. She was just afraid that Xiao Hua would pursue this matter in the future, so she apologized first to pave the way. As for the specific reason, she wouldn't be stupid enough to say it now. So she smiled and said, when I saw fellow Taoist Xiao that day, I felt that fellow Taoist was unusual. I always felt that fellow Taoist's temperament didn't match fellow Taoist cultivation. Now it seems that's the case. Haha. Xiao Hua laughed, looked up at the sky, and said with a smile, today is probably the last day of the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple recruitment. Let's go up the mountain quickly. Don't delay the time. Xue Xue nodded and looked around again. Just a moment ago, it was still a bit lively, but now it was already the last moment. Fellow Taoist Xiao, please. Xue Xue waved her hand and said, flying on Sky Thunder Peak is not allowed. We have to walk. Okay. Fellow Taoist Xue, please. Xiao Hua smiled and descended with Xue Xue, following a few cultivators who were in a hurry up the Sky Thunder Peak. At this time, the sun had already set. In front of the Imperial Thunder Sect's guest pavilion, the handsome Imperial Thunder Sect disciple Qin Luo was still standing with his hands behind his back. However, at this time, he was squinting his eyes and looking at the red sun that was about to fall on the Thunder Mountain range in the west. The red light of the setting sun shone on his handsome face, making him look even more spirited. Xiao Hua came to the guest pavilion at this moment. Just like the others, Xiao Hua was also rather surprised when he saw the shabby state of the Imperial Thunder Sect's guest pavilion. However, he immediately understood something. A mountain is not high, but it has an immortal. A water is not deep, but it has a dragon. Compared to absolute strength, all the decorations, all the prosperity, were insignificant. Therefore, although Huan Hua sect was famous and had many disciples, compared to the Imperial Thunder sect, it was still a lot worse. Rinsing Flower sect. Xiao Hua thought to himself. He wondered if Fairy Hong Xia had already joined the Rinsing Flower sect. Fellow Taoist Xiao? Xue Xue stood at the side and whispered, let's stand over there. Xiao Hua stared blankly. Following Xue Xue's finger, he saw more than a dozen cultivators in the 8th layer of aura refining and above standing far away from the guest pavilion. Around him were several dozen cultivators in the 4th or 5th layer of aura refining. There were even a few in the 2nd layer of aura refining. These cultivators had some reverence in their eyes. Standing next to Xiao Hua and Xue Xue, they were very reserved. Damn it, I accidentally became a high-level cultivator too. Xiao Hua doesn't have the awareness of a high-level cultivator. He smacks his lips and walks towards those 8th layer aura refining cultivators. Greetings, fellow Taoist. Xiao Hua chuckles as he walks over and greets those cultivators. Unexpectedly, those cultivators are also somewhat afraid. They only cupped their hands and saluted, but didn't say anything to Xiao Hua, making him feel very bored. Seeing Xiao Hua's somewhat gloomy expression, Xue Xue chuckles and says, fellow Taoist Xiao, all the high-level cultivators have already come here a few days ago. Fellow Taoist is about to reach the 11th layer of aura refining. You're the bane of these 8th and 9th layer aura refining cultivators. Think about it, the Imperial Thunder Sect has a limited number of disciples. You're their strongest opponent, so why wouldn't they avoid you? Oh, Xiao Hua touches his nose and nods, saying, I still can't get used to it. His words are a bit vague, so Xue Xue doesn't ask much. Like the other cultivators, she stands quietly and waits for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple to make arrangements. Xiao Hua's thoughts are naturally somewhat different from theirs. He looks at Qin Luo, thinks for a moment, and walks over. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Xue Xue hurriedly calls out in a low voice. Xiao Hua turns his head and slightly nods at her, but his footsteps don't stop. However, before Xiao Hua can approach Qin Luo, an invisible force blocks Xiao Hua in front of him, preventing him from approaching. If there's nothing else, stay there first. Just as Xiao Hua wants to speak, He hears Kan Luo say coldly, although your cultivation is the highest here, but you still don't have the qualifications to talk to me. If you want to take advantage of I here, you'd better save your effort. I. Xiaohua opens his mouth, not knowing what to say. If I were you, I'd obediently stand there and wait. Today is the last day of the disciple recruitment. You just have to endure for another hour, and my Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple will come to take you up the mountain. If you continue to be noisy, be careful I don't kick you out of the mountain. Kan Luo doesn't use sound transmission to say these words. Instead, he clearly says them. Everyone in the surroundings of the guest pavilion can hear it. Everyone's gazes are a bit gloating, a bit mocking, and a bit sympathetic. These words make Xiaohua blush. He flings his sleeves and turns around. He doesn't say a word and just stands there quietly. Kan Luo is very annoyed. Since the Imperial Thunder Sect announced the start of the disciple recruitment, today is already the 5th day. In these 5 days, who knows how many extremely discerning cultivators have shown off in front of him. He originally thought that these people would have some kind of relationship with Qian Qinghua, but after interacting with them for a long time, it turns out that they are all flatterers. They are far from what he imagined, so later on, he has to deal with them half coldly and half passionately. And now, it is already the last moment, and the Imperial Thunder Sect still hasn't obtained the information they want. How can Kan Luo not be annoyed? Seeing Xiaohua come forward, he immediately stops him. After saying some cold words, he sends his divine sense down the mountain. He wants to see if there are any more cultivators on the gradually desolate mountain path. Alas, I can't blame Kan Luo, and I can't blame Xiaohua either. Because those who can think of showing off in front of Kan Luo are all 10th layer aura refining cultivators, even 11th layer aura refining cultivators. They are all people who have the possibility of winning the disciple selection. Only these people have some lively thoughts, and only these people think they are qualified to speak a few more words with the Imperial Thunder School's disciples. And Xiaohua just happens to be the same as these disciples. Seeing that dusk is coming, Kan Luo sighs softly. His gaze swept over the group of low-level cultivators again. He stretches out his hand, but before he can use thunder sound transmission, he hears a buzzing sound in the air. It is the sound of the thunderboat flying over. When the thunderboat lands, Kan Luo waves his hand and yells, "Everyone get on!" Then he takes the lead and flies to the front of the thunderboat. Good heavens, this flying boat isn't just ordinarily cool. Xiaohua flies onto the thunderboat while looking at the flickering lightning around the boat with envy. Hee, fellow Taoist Xiao, this thunderboat is unique to the Imperial Thunder Sect. Don't be fooled by its size. Its flying speed is absolutely first class. Only the 7 possibilities sect's flowing cloud flying boat can compete with this thunderboat. Hearing this, Xiaohua's heart is moved. He says with a smile, "I've heard that the Imperial Thunder Sect's thunder escape technique is world famous. Is this thunderboat also born from the thunder escape technique?" At this moment, Shui and Xiaohua have already landed on the thunderboat. The thunderboat is empty, with only a few dozen people standing on it. In the center of the thunderboat is a protrusion of about 10 feet. This protrusion is a depression. In the depression, there is a faint blue magic formation. At this moment, it is faintly shining. Occasionally, there are small arcs of lightning flying out from it. Around this protrusion, there are more than 10 children around the age of 10. Their faces are somewhat tired and they are scattered around. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Shui points with her finger and says in a low voice, "The Imperial Thunder Sect's thunder escape technique is their secret technique. Ordinary people can't see it. As for whether this thunderboat is born from the thunder escape technique, I don't know. However, Misty Mountain and a cultivator from the Imperial Thunder Sect have some old ties. I have also heard about this thunderboat before." Fellow Taoist, do you see the depression in the thunderboat? Shui says in a low voice, "Yes, I see it." Xiaohua nods and says, "That is probably the driving formation of the thunderboat, right?" "Yes, fellow Taoist Xiao is right." Shui gives a thumbs up and says in a low voice, "However, the driving formation of the Imperial Thunder Sect is different from others. This driving formation is a lightning pool." Lightning pool? Xiaohua is shocked. He looks at the magic formation in disbelief and asks, "Is that lightning inside?" I only said that the driving formation is a lightning pool. I didn't say that this is a lightning pool. Shue Shue says with a smile. The lightning pool on this thunderboat is the simplest one. I'm afraid that it is driven by lightning spirit stones. It can only be used for flying, so it can't be considered a real lightning pool. Then, she lowers her voice and says mysteriously, "It is said that there is a real lightning pool in the Thunder Sect's Thunderimo Mountains. It provides spiritual power for all the magic formations and restrictions of the Imperial Thunder Sect. This is exactly because of the lightning pool. In every generation of the Imperial Thunder Sect disciples, there are always a few outstanding ones. They can almost beat the outstanding disciples of the three major sects." Speaking of the lightning pool, Xiaohua naturally thinks of the bead that Qian Qinghua asked him to bring. That bead might be called the lightning bead. Maybe it is in the lightning pool. While Xiaohua and Shue Shue are talking, all the cultivators have come up. A slightly older boy comes up to report to Kenluo. Kenluo releases his spiritual sense and scans the bottom of the mountain for the last time. Then he waves his hand and says, "Let's go." There are no more cultivators at the bottom of the mountain. "Yes, senior brother Kenluo." The boy bows and returns. With an order, 8 out of the 10 boys stand up and stand around the lightning pool. Then, one of the disciples makes a hand sign and hits a corner of the lightning pool with spiritual power. Then, the other 7 disciples also make different hand signs, but they hit different places. Wong Wong, as the hand signs are hit, the lightning pool actually becomes dull and the blue lightning inside gradually increases. As the Wong Wong sound becomes louder, the thunderboat slowly rises. When it is in the air, it immediately turns around and flies in the direction of Sky Thunder Peak like lightning. -6. Chapter 15:11. Xuanyan Sect's Xuanyan Mountain had a towering mountain range surrounded by many other mountains. There were countless exotic flowers and grasses on this mountain peak, and all kinds of rare birds and beasts were leisurely strolling around the foothills. Many auspicious clouds were like brocades that covered many parts of the mountain range, making it seem boundless and ethereal. Occasionally, a flying crane would appear, making the mountain peak seem like a fairyland. This mountain range was Xuanyan Sect's main peak, Gold Mountain Range. Under the cover of the auspicious clouds, there were many majestic palaces scattered all over the mountain range. At the highest point, where the auspicious clouds were the densest, there was a majestic palace. It was the Wild Goose Spirit Palace of Xuanyan Cult. At this time, on the high platform of Yinling Palace, Fairy Yingxua's face was as cold as ice. She sat on a gorgeous warm jade chair, and her eyes were like lightning, coldly looking below the high platform. Below the high platform, there were more than 10 cultivators sitting majestically. They all looked down, as if they were meditating. Elder Xian, about the Thunder Pearl, is there still no progress? Fairy Yingxua looked below the platform for a long time, sighed softly, and asked coldly. A thin young man with a Midyuanian cultivation raised his face slightly, moved his body, and cupped his hands. "Yes, I will let you know about the Thunder Pearl. My Xuanyan sect knew about it too late. Shanghua sect got it first, but it was taken by Imperial Thunder sect's Qian Qinghua. I know all of this. 2 years have passed. Where is Qian Qinghua? Where is the Thunder Pearl? Just because I didn't ask doesn't mean I don't care about it." Fairy Yingxua sneered. "Don't you know what the Thunder Pearl is? If Imperial Thunder sect gets it, I'm afraid there will be some twists and turns, right?" Haha. Elder Yi Xian smiled apologetically. "Of course I know, otherwise my Xuanyan sect wouldn't have intervened. But there is no news of Qian Qinghua, and the whereabouts of the Thunder Pearl are unknown." On that day, a cultivator saw a vagrant cultivator named Xiaohua meet Qian Qinghua. However, this Xiaohua mysteriously disappeared while being chased by our 3 Sects Foundation establishment disciples. I presume that this Thunder Pearl was taken by this Xiaohua. The problem is that the Imperial Thunder Sect has now opened their doors to accept disciples. They want to use this opportunity to avoid the joint blockade of our 3 sects and let this Xiaohua go up the mountain. This also showed that the one who took Xiao Huawei was not a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Then, who is it? Today is the last day for the Imperial Thunder sect to accept disciples up the mountain. According to the disciples of my sect in the Layamo mountain range, they didn't find that rogue cultivator up the mountain. Hehe, I'm afraid that the Imperial Thunder sect will have worked for nothing. If the Imperial Thunder sect worked for nothing, wouldn't our three sects also work for nothing? Fairy Ingjua sneered and said, a few Foundation establishment disciples can't even catch a single chi refining loose cultivator. What do you want me to say to you? It's really getting worse with each generation. Elder Ishuan's face didn't change and said, according to what I know, this Xiaohua is probably a trick of Qian Qinghua. How can he give such a precious thunder pearl to a chi refining loose cultivator? As for Qian Qinghua himself, it is said that he was seriously injured by the Qianhua sect's disciples. If he is not in seclusion somewhere to recuperate, he will die. I don't know if the life spirit tablet of Qian Qinghua in the Imperial Thunder sect has been damaged. In that case, send more people to watch this matter. It's only been 2 years. If Qian Qinghua wants to recover, it will take at least 8 to 10 years. This thunder pearl must not be allowed to be taken up to the sky thunder peak smoothly. Yes, I will follow the sect master's order, Elder Ishuan said with his hands folded. Zhenren Ishuan said it. Elder Jieqiong, how is the matter on your side? Fairy Ingjua turned and asked. A young and beautiful female cultivator next to Elder Ishuan was slightly surprised and bowed and said, I don't know what the sect master is talking about. Fairy Ingjua frowned and said unhappily, Fairy Jieqiong, although cultivation is important, but the important affairs of the sect must also be taken care of. Otherwise, how can my Xuanyan sect survive for tens of thousands of years in the country of Xi? Yes, I understand. Although Fairy Jieqiong didn't agree, she still nodded and said, I have been practicing a kind of magic art for nearly 10 years. Now I have gradually made some progress, so I don't have to worry about it. Well, I'm asking about your hunting seedlings. How is it going? Fairy Ingjua said softly. Oh, sect master is talking about that matter. Fairy Jieqiong heard and said with some disdain, hunting seedlings is just an attempt, but the situation is not good. While speaking, Fairy Jieqiong waved her sleeve, and in midair, a huge mirror appeared out of thin air. Inside the mirror, there was really a cold ice cave. There was a thick layer of ice inside the cave, and from the top of the cave, there were hundreds of huge ice thorns hanging down. On the ice layer, there were more than 10 young cultivators of different ages, all of them sitting cross-legged. Their bodies were constantly trembling, and there was a faint, ferocious look on their faces. Sect Master, this hunting seedlings of our sect has 99 disciples participating. As early as when the fire marrow flame crystal was integrated into the meridians, there were 62 disciples who exploded due to the violent fire spiritual energy of the fire marrow flame crystal. Not only their meridians, but their entire bodies were torn apart. Is it because too much of the fire marrow flame crystal was integrated? Fairy Ingjua frowned slightly and asked. Sect Master, the fire marrow flame crystal has been divided into 99 portions by me. It really can't be divided anymore. Fairy Jieqiong replied, and I think it's not about the amount of fire spiritual energy in the fire marrow flame crystal. The key is the spiritual energy in the fire marrow flame crystal. It's different from the fire spiritual energy that we usually absorb into our bodies. Fairy Ingjua's expression was indifferent, and she did not comment. Fairy Jieqiong did not pay attention to Fairy Ingjua's reaction and continued. Also, the physique of those disciples, or their meridians, cannot be reconciled with the fire spiritual energy in the fire marrow flame crystal. Once the fire spiritual energy entered their bodies, before they could use the cultivation method that was taught previously, their meridians would be torn apart, and the ice spiritual energy in the cold cave did not have any effect at all. Then, what about these disciples? Fairy Ingjua looked at the mirror. Among the remaining 37 disciples, other than the 3 disciples on the left, the other 34 disciples are a little special. These disciples were sent by the sect master to participate. I don't know why nothing happened to them. What's so special about those three disciples? Fairy Yingzhua was slightly stunned and asked curiously. These three disciples are called Pan Hao, Feng Linbua, and Xiao Mao. Before the first two entered my Xuanyan school, they were outstanding disciples of a declining body cultivation sect. Xiao Mao is nothing special. He entered my Xuanyan school since he was young, but his aptitude is not good, so he signed up this time. And his aptitude is not good. Fairy Yingzhua sneered. Not cultivating fast does not mean that his aptitude is not good. This Xiao Mao was able to survive when the others exploded and died. How can his aptitude be bad? Yes, I understand. Fairy Jeqiong nodded and then slightly opened her mouth, wanting to say something but hesitated. Is there a problem? Fairy Yingzhua saw clearly and asked. Yes, I want to ask. These 34 disciples that the sect master brought, what's so special about them? Fairy Jeqiong replied. Hee, I won't answer you first. You tell me what's the difference between them and the others. Then I'll embarrass myself. Fairy Jeqiong thought for a moment and said, these 34 disciples seem to have traces of body cultivation, but they are not body cultivation. Also, their meridians seem to have cultivated our sect's secret technique, so they are much wider than the other disciples. What Elder Jeqiong said is about right. Looking at Fairy Jeqiong's eyes, Fairy Yingzhua smiled and said, do you remember the dragon blood and dragon meat that I brought back 5 years ago? It seems. I have some impression of it. Fairy Jeqiong's face was blank. Looking at Fairy Jeqiong's vague expression, Fairy Yingzhua didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She laughed and said, these 34 disciples used dragon blood to mold their body and dragon meat to replenish their energy. So it's like this. Fairy Jeqiong cupped her hands and said, Sect Master's foresight is far beyond what I can achieve. While they were talking, on the mirror, on the upper right hand, a disciple's body suddenly lay on the ice surface. His 4 limbs twitched violently and his face showed an extremely painful expression. Not good. Quickly. Seeing this, Fairy Jeqiong immediately knew that something was wrong. She waved her sleeves and was about to make a move, but a pong sound was heard and that disciple's body exploded. His flesh and blood turned into a blood mist and scattered in all directions. At this moment, a dark red brilliance flashed, and that blood mist was blocked by this brilliance. Then, the whole brilliance rolled up and collected all the blood mist. It drilled into the ground and disappeared. On the ground and on the surrounding people, there was not a single trace of blood left. This, Fairy Yingzhua's somewhat excited mood was instantly extinguished by cold water. She looked at the mirror in a daze. Sect Master, I think that there is no shortcut in the path of cultivation. You can only rely on your own diligence and hard work to steadily improve your cultivation. This kind of hasty method, I'm afraid there is no hope. That secret technique that uses fire essence flame crystal, I'm afraid it's useless. Before Fairy Jeqiong's words fell on the mirror, another disciple exploded and died. Fairy Yingzhua shook her head slightly and said, at the beginning of the ancient era, there were no cultivators in the world. Most of them were wild spirits. Their bodies were tyrannical and their abilities were natural. And this fire essence flame crystal was what they used to refine their bodies and meridians. Also, this secret technique that uses fire essence flame crystal was obtained from an extremely reliable person. I think it's useful. Fairy Yingzhua smiled and said, this hasty method can be considered hasty for now. In the future, I'm afraid it will be used normally. So, Elder Jeqiong, don't delay the future development of my Xuanyan school by doing unnecessary things. Sect Master, what do you mean? Fairy Jeqiong was stunned and asked, this matter, how should I put it? Fairy Jeqiong, have you noticed that the spiritual energy of heaven and earth seems to be different from before? If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -6. Chapter 15:12. What? There's a change in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Not only Jeqiong Fairy, but the other nascent soul cultivators also changed their expressions. These people looked at each other, and their eyes were full of horror. One of the white-haired nascent soul cultivators stood up and asked, Master, we are all nascent soul cultivators, and the babies in our bodies are formed by the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If there's a change in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, how can this baby exist between heaven and earth? How can we use this baby to communicate with heaven and earth? How can we use this baby to control the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? Fairy Ingjua's face showed a trace of melancholy and whispered, I only heard some rumors, and even with my cultivation, I didn't feel the change in it. I'm just asking everyone, if there's no change, then it's the best. Oh, everyone was relieved, but there were still some doubts in their eyes. What is the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? This was the foundation of the Daybreak Continent's cultivation world. The refinement stage was to draw energy into the body, which was the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. The foundation establishment stage was to refine the true qi in the body into a liquid state. This true qi was formed from the spiritual energy of heaven and earth that was drawn into the body. The golden core stage was to condense the liquid true qi in the dantian into a golden core, which was used as the embryo to cultivate the nascent soul. This series of processes relies on the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If there's a change in the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, it will not only affect the cultivation of a cultivator, but also the existence of the entire cultivation world of Xiaoyu continent. For such an important matter, how could Fairy Yingjua ask about it casually? Although Jieqiong Fairy is obsessed with cultivation and doesn't like worldly affairs, but her mind is very fast. Just when she was relieved, she suddenly realized something and jumped up from her chair. She stuttered and said, Sect? Sect Master, could it be? Subordinate's divine ability has always been. Fairy Yingjua frowned slightly and said in a low voice, Elder Jieqiong, I have already said that this kind of thing. I also don't know. If the magical power that you practice is really closely related to the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, you might as well take my words as a suggestion. Fairy Jieqiong thought for a while and nodded. I understand. But then, Elder Yixian asked again, Master, this method of picking seedlings, is it related to these? Hee. Fairy Yingjua stood up and said, even if the spiritual qi of heaven and earth has changed, it will not affect everyone in a short period of time. Perhaps it will take tens of thousands of years, or even millions of years before the things that you are thinking about will happen. Furthermore, we are merely nascent soul cultivators. There are deity transformation cultivators above us. This is something that they should be worried about. Our Shi country's cultivation world is weak. Whether it is the Lian country or the Ming country, they are all stronger than our Shi country. They will definitely be more careful. Sect leaders' words are reasonable. At this time, the Immortal Alliance has not been disbanded. If there are any changes, they will know even more clearly. We don't have to worry for nothing. The old man with white hair and beard said with a smile. Fairy Yingjua raised her head and looked at the situation in the mirror. She pointed with her finger and said, no matter what, if this grasping seedling can succeed, it will be a great opportunity for our Xuanyan school to increase our strength. Elder Jieqiong, don't be careless. Always pay attention to the situation of these 30 disciples. Yes, subordinate understands. Jieqiong Fairy bowed respectfully. While the Xuanyan cult was having their meeting, on the Thunder Immortal Peak of the Leimo mountain range, there was a simple and unadorned house. 8 transparent pillars were erected from the ground, each of them reaching a height of 1 zhong. These 8 pillars were arranged in a very mysterious manner. Furthermore, at the top of each pillar, there was a dark green praying mat. There was no moonlight stone in the house. The transparent pillars flashed with lightning from time to time, illuminating the entire house. At this moment, there were 8 male and female cultivators sitting cross-legged on top of the praying mats. Among these 8 cultivators, 6 were nascent soul cultivators. The other 2 looked rather old, but they were gold core cultivators. Among them, a middle-aged cultivator with a red face had a calm expression. He seemed to be meditating. However, when a flash of lightning appeared from the pillar below him, his eyes suddenly opened. Within his deep eyes, there was a faint flash of light. This middle-stage nascent soul cultivator was the sect leader of the Imperial Thunder sect, Jianlazi. Miyu, is there still no news of Qinghua? Lazy's voice was extremely loud as he asked a handsome young cultivator not far away. That young cultivator was also a middle-stage, nascent soul cultivator. The young cultivator was Taoist Miyu. Hearing Lazy's question, she also opened her eyes and replied, "Sect leader, we only know that Xinghua went missing near Shihuang town. There is no other news." "Xinhua, Qinghua's life spirit tablet is still intact, right?" "Sect leader, it's still the same as before. It's completely intact." Another middle-stage, nascent soul cultivator said with a smile. "Good." Lazy clapped his hands and said, "As long as Qinghua is fine, then what's the point of Shanghua sect, Qiqiao sect, and Xuanyan school tormenting each other?" "Sect leader, even we can't find any trace of Qinghua. I'm afraid because Qinghua was heavily injured, he used our sect's soul concealing technique to conceal his life force and aura. Not to mention divine sense, even the naked eye can't find him. If our sect's disciples don't use the corresponding technique to awaken him, then Qinghua will." "Taoist me, you reminded. If we can find him, then wouldn't Shanghua sect have found him long ago?" Lazy said with a smile, "Since they're still setting up defenses around our Laimo mountain range, that means Qinghua is still very safe. As for how to awaken Qinghua Sai, that will depend on Qinghua's luck." "Sect leader, Shanghua sect, Xuanyan school, and Qiqiao sect are really hateful. They actually dared to make a move near our Imperial Thunder sect. Taoist Miyu frowned. "Hee, Miyu, you're also a nascent soul cultivator. Why are you still so impulsive? Although our Imperial Thunder sect is strong, if we face the three sects together, we won't have the strength to fight back. We're just guessing. Let them do their work for now. Patience, you know? Only those who can endure can become powerful." "Humph, do you think we're afraid of them? Martial uncles and the others. Martial uncles and the others are in seclusion to comprehend life and death. They won't act unless our Imperial Thunder sect is in absolute danger. Moreover, the other three sects also have something to rely on." "That's right. How's the disciple recruitment this year? Has it started?" Lazy said a few words to Taoist Miyu. Then, he thought of something and asked, "Sect leader, today is the last day. The new disciple recruitment will begin tomorrow." A gold core cultivator who was far away from Lazy quickly said, "Oh, Jinsheng, I've done as you said and opened the door for all cultivators in the country of Shi to participate in the selection. I wonder, did you find anything?" "Sect leader, in the past 5 days, I've already asked Kuan, but it seems that I didn't find anything." The cultivator named Jinsheng blushed and said in a low voice, "I wonder if on the last day, your idea is very good. Unfortunately, with Qinghua's fiery temper, how could he come up with such a wonderful idea? Moreover, it's unlikely that he'll find a suitable candidate. Besides, many Foundation establishment late-stage disciples from the three sects have gone to Shihuang town. Your idea is a bit whimsical." "Taoist me," you said with a smile. "Martial Ant, I just feel that the three sects' actions in Shihuang town are understandable, but later on, they sent many disciples to other places. This makes me very puzzled. If it's not another cultivator entrusted by Qinghua, it's hard to explain." Jinsheng bit his lips and argued, It's fine, it's fine. Anyway, the disciple recruitment is a matter between you and Duijia. Aren't you afraid that things will get complicated? What will I say later?" Lazy said with a smile, "In the past, our Imperial Thunder sect's disciple recruitment was too strict. As a result, our strength was limited. Even if we knew that the three sects were doing something strange, we didn't have the power to investigate." While they were talking, Lazy raised his head and said with a smile, "All right, this is Kuan. Jinsheng, you asked him to come, right? Let's see if your plan works." Sure enough, not long after, Kuan arrived outside the room. He stood there respectfully and didn't dare to make a sound. Jinsheng looked at Lazy anxiously. It seemed like he was asking for permission. Lazy nodded slightly. Jinsheng shouted, "Kuan, come in?" "Yes, disciple obeys." Kuan bowed and replied. After entering the room, Kuan didn't dare to raise his head. He only bowed and said, "Disciple Kuan greets sect master and martial ancestors." Lazy and the others didn't say anything. Only Jinsheng hurriedly said, Qin Kuan, did anyone bring back news about your martial uncle Qinghua? Martial ancestor, there were a few groups of cultivators who came to talk to me today. However, none of them mentioned martial uncle Qinghua to me. Qin Kuan replied respectfully, "Are you sure?" Jin Sheng looked a little disappointed and asked again, "Martial ancestor?" Qin Kuan was speechless. Just as he was about to say something, Qian Lazy scolded, "Jin Sheng, yes, disciple knows his mistake." Jin Sheng's face immediately turned serious. He cupped his hands and replied, "Okay, you guys can leave first. Duijia, we'll be recruiting disciples tomorrow. You guys will have to work hard. Try to be more diligent. This year, we might as well relax a little and recruit a few more disciples." "Yes, disciple understands." Another golden core stage female cultivator stood up and bowed. After Jin Sheng, Duijia, and Qin Kuan left, Qian Lazy waved his hand and cast out a spell. The entire room flashed with light. Qian Lazy then said, "Xinhua, what's the situation with the lightning pool?" "Sect Master, the situation with the lightning pool is very different from 10 years ago. It seems like the lightning from the heavens can't completely merge with the lightning pool. Also, the new lightning water has a destructive effect on the old lightning water. It has decreased the power of the lightning pool by a lot. If we can't find a way to fix it, within a few thousand years, the lightning pool will." Fairy Xian Hua's words were vague, but everyone heard it clearly. They couldn't help but worry. "It's that serious?" Qian Lazy was even more shocked. He said anxiously, 5 years ago, we discovered the abnormality of the lightning. That's when we thought of the lightning pool. The lightning pool has been in our sect for countless years. How can it have such a change?" Lei Ming, a few years ago, I remember when you went to Thunder Accumulation Mountain, the Thunder Accumulation Cave also changed. Qian Lazy asked another young cultivator. That young cultivator was the early Yuanying stage cultivator that Xiao Hua met in Thunder Accumulation Mountain. Sect Master, disciples of the Thunder Accumulation Cave, used to go there often. However, when I went there last time, the lightning was indeed different from before. However, I couldn't tell exactly what the difference was. Lei Ming Daoist cupped his hands and said, "Qinghua left a message saying that it was related to the lightning. He didn't explain it clearly. This guy has always been so reckless." Miyu said. -6. Chapter 15:13. The night was as dark as ink, dyeing the entire Leimo mountain range black. The thunderboat, carrying Xiao Hua and the others, landed in front of a mountain peak. The mountain peak was several hundred zhang tall, and its peak was above the black clouds, making it impossible to see its full appearance. Under the black clouds, it was gloomy with countless shadows, making it even harder to see its outline. The thunderboat flashed with lightning as it gradually approached the mountain peak. Ripples appeared in the air, and the thunderboat was like a stone thrown into the water, stirring up the entire space. Xiaohua stood on the thunderboat and looked at this strange scene. He already understood that the Imperial Thunder Sect must have placed a restriction on the mountain peak. Sure enough, when the thunderboat completely disappeared, Xiaohua's eyes lit up, and his vision suddenly became clear. This was a mountain peak filled with lush flowers and plants. Although it was already late at night, there were many large balls hovering in the air above the mountain peak. Within those balls, there were countless crackling lightning bolts that emitted a light blue luster. These lights illuminated the entire mountain peak. Other than the fact that everyone's faces were blue, there was no difference from the clear blue sky. Looking at the mountain peak, there were many cultivators scattered all over the mountain peak like ants. These cultivators were either resting with their eyes closed, discussing in 2s and 3s, or walking back and forth. Good, this Imperial Thunder Sect is really generous. Not to mention the restriction on the mountain peak, just the number of disciples who came to participate in this selection should be in the tens of thousands, right? Xiao Hua was shocked. Shui obviously didn't expect such a spectacular scene. She stared blankly, and was even more absent-minded than Xiao Hua. Seeing the thunderboat land, Shui came back to her senses and complained in her heart, this time. The Imperial Thunder Sect delayed the selection of disciples for 2 years, and they also greatly relaxed the conditions. I admittedly got some opportunities, but to stand out from the tens of thousands of cultivators, it's really not possible. Then, she glanced at Xiao Hua, whose expression was as usual, and her heart was moved again, and she had some plans. The thunderbolt landed, and Kanluo flew down, directly flying away. The several children's faces were full of exhaustion. The leader cupped his hands and said, "Fellow Taoists, this is my Imperial Thunder Sect's Thunderclap Mountain. Tomorrow's selection will be held here. This time, too many disciples have come to my Imperial Thunder Sect to become apprentices. My Imperial Thunder Sect doesn't have that many idle disciples to entertain you. Please stay here for the night. Please forgive me if I have been rude in any way." When the cultivators saw the boy's exhaustion, they knew that these tens of thousands of people were brought up the mountain by these disciples using the thunderboats. How could they not know the hardships involved? They all bowed to express their gratitude. Then, they flew down from the thunder ship and found a quiet place to rest. Xiaohua and Shui were the last to disembark from the thunderboat. After the thunderboat flew away, Xiaohua cupped his hands and said, "Daoist Shui, I am tired from the journey, so I need to take a rest. See you at the selection tomorrow." "Fellow Taoist Xiao," Shui hurriedly said when she saw Xiaohua asking her to leave. "Fellow Taoist, do you know the content of tomorrow's selection?" Xiaohua was dazed. "You don't know?" Afterwards, his brows raised and he laughed. "Could it be that fellow Taoist Shui knows? Hee, I won't hide it from fellow Taoist Xiao. As early as 2 years ago, I met fellow Taoist I wanted to participate in the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection. However, I don't know why it has been delayed until today. In order for I to enter the Imperial Thunder Sect, my Misty Mountain has put in a lot of effort. Therefore, if fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't mind, I am willing to discuss the situation of tomorrow's selection with fellow Taoist Xiao first." Xiaohua looked at Shui up and down a few times in a daze and said curiously, "Since it's something from your Misty Mountain, then I can't listen to it for free, right?" Hee. According to what fellow Taoist Xiao said, fellow Taoist Xiao has given my Misty Mountain a lot of benefits. This little bit of information, if it is said today, it might have some value. When tomorrow's selection begins, it won't even be worth half a spirit stone. How would I dare to take fellow Taoist Zhao's benefits? Xiaohua's impression of Shui was quite good. Especially last time in the Flame Forest Swamp, she had obviously spoken up for him. Therefore, although Xiaohua understood Shui's meaning, he still laughed and said, "In that case, I will take advantage of fellow Taoist Xiao for free." Bah! Hearing the somewhat ambiguous words, Shui unconsciously spat in her heart. Her face was slightly red, and she said with a smile, "Then, fellow Taoist Xiao, please wait for I to tell fellow Taoist Xiao in detail." The two of them found a quiet place and sat down cross-legged. Above their heads, there was an azure ball floating up and down. Shui cleared her throat, used a silence talisman, and whispered the rules of the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection. The Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection was different from the Cleansing Flower Sect's. The Imperial Thunder Sect's cultivation methods were somewhat special. Many of them required a thunder attribute physique, and this thunder attribute was extremely rare among the cultivators. It could even be said that there was 1 in 10,000 cultivators. However, as long as a thunder attribute cultivator was selected by the Imperial Thunder Sect, then, basically, this cultivator was already half a step into the ranks of Foundation Establishment cultivators. Although these cultivation methods had harsh requirements, they were very fast to cultivate. In addition, the Thunder Mountain Range's unique conditions were very beneficial for cultivating thunder attribute cultivation methods. With these conditions added together, it was impossible for the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples to cultivate slowly. It was precisely because of this that the Imperial Thunder Sect paid special attention to the physique of the disciples. The first selection method was to test one's physique. The thunder attribute was subordinate to the fire attribute of the 5 elements. A fire attribute physique could also cultivate the Imperial Thunder Sect's cultivation methods, but it wouldn't be as fast as a pure thunder attribute. In the first test of physique, other than the thunder and fire attributes, the Imperial Thunder Sect didn't want any other attributes. Of course, occasionally, some disciples with special attributes would be favored by the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples, and would be recruited into the Imperial Thunder sect. The attribute test is using that kind of ball? When Xiaohua heard this, his first reaction was that when he was in Yellow Flower Ridge, Xiao Hongyue took out the ball to test his physique. Good to let fellow Xiao know. That kind of attribute crystal ball is used to test the 5 elements. A thunder attribute physique inside the crystal ball can only show a fiery red color, no different from the fire attribute. I'm afraid that it won't be able to detect the difference. Shue smiled and said, the Imperial Thunder sect uses a kind of crystal rod, which is more sensitive. Moreover, that crystal rod can show different lengths of color according to the purity of the physique. Purity of physique? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled and asked, what do you mean by this? Shue glanced at Xiaohua, not sure whether he really understood or not. However, she still explained, all cultivators are in the 5 elements, so the entire body of the 5 elements exists. Saying that it's the water attribute only means that the water attribute of the 5 elements is more prominent than the other elements. When cultivating a water attribute cultivation method, it's even more effective. This crystal rod's length and color bars represent the different degrees of the 5 elements in the cultivator's body. Oh, so it's like this. Xiaohua understood, but thinking of the scene of his first test, he couldn't help but ask, then, are there any cultivators without any of the 5 elements? Impossible, Shue said flatly. Maybe some cultivators don't have any reaction when using the attribute crystal ball to test, and are thought to have no attributes. But under the attribute crystal rods test, the 5 elements are definitely about the same level. It should belong to the range of the 5 elements balance. Cultivators with balanced 5 elements can cultivate any cultivation method? Xiaohua asked soon after. Fellow Taoist Xiao is right. These people with complete 5 elements can cultivate any cultivation method. Shue smiled and said, but it's very difficult for them to reach the peak of any cultivation method, and it's very difficult for them to step into the high level of qi refinement. Xiaohua nodded and asked, then what about the second test? The second test is a battle of spells. It's to test the degree of familiarity with the spells, the meticulous control of magic power, the battle experience, and so on. Shue said without hesitation, in the past, when the Imperial Thunder sect recruited disciples, they always took the top 10. After that, unless the Imperial Thunder sect's elders personally picked them, the other cultivators were all eliminated. 10 disciples? Xiaohua sucked in a breath of cold air and said with a bitter smile, this time there are several tens of thousands of people. Only 10 disciples. Doesn't the Imperial Thunder sect feel that it's too wasteful? Maybe. Shue shrugged and said, the Imperial Thunder sect has never cared about this. Because as long as they can be recruited by the Imperial Thunder sect, they will eventually have achievements. Just based on this alone, every year, many disciples flock to the sect. Like a few years ago, when I knew that I had no hope of entering the Imperial Thunder sect, I didn't dare to think too much. Only when my cultivation improved did I dare to have this extravagant hope. Shue said with a bitter smile. Anything else? Xiaohua asked. This? Shue thought for a moment and said in a low voice, to be honest, a few years ago, my Misty Mountain befriended a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. He just happens to be a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect's 8 great thunder palaces and often participates in the disciple selection. So, fellow Taoist Shue can get some extra help. Xiaohua said with a disapproving smile. Shue was a little embarrassed and said with a smile, exactly. The Imperial Thunder sect's 8 great thunder palaces? Xiaohua narrowed his eyes and looked at the many balls of lightning in the air and said with a smile, which thunder palaces are they? Fellow Taoist Xiao, you don't know? Shue was a little surprised. The Imperial Thunder sect's 8 great thunder palaces are famous in the cultivation world. I just don't know. Xiaohua said with a smile. Fellow Taoist Shue, please enlighten me. Shue nodded and pointed with a finger, saying, that high mountain in the distance should be the main peak of the Imperial Thunder sect. The Sky Thunder Peak is used to welcome guests and is also where the Imperial Thunder sect's mountain gate is located. However, the Imperial Thunder sect's Heavenly Thunder Palace is not on it. but on the Thunder Immortal Peak. The Heavenly Thunder Palace is controlled by the Imperial Thunder Sect's sect master, and the disciples there are all direct disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Most of these disciples have the surname Qian. These disciples with the surname Qian were born from the dual cultivation of male and female disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Since birth, they have been specially trained. Qian, Xiaohua was stunned, but immediately understood that Qian Qinghua was a direct disciple of the Heavenly Thunder Palace, and his identity was indeed of great origin. Immediately after, Shui gave a simple introduction of the other 7 Thunder Palaces of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Only then did Xiaohua know that the Imperial Thunder Sect's 8 great Thunder Palaces were Heavenly Thunder Palace, Earthly Thunder Palace, Canlei Palace, Distant Thunder Palace, Shocking Thunder Palace, Gen Thunder Palace, Sun Thunder Palace, and Exchanged Thunder Palace. These 8 great Thunder Palaces were located on different 8 mountain peaks, and each had their own duties. Among them, Gen Thunder Palace and Exchange Thunder Palace were responsible for the recruitment of disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Moreover, these 2 great Thunder Palaces only recruited disciples of the Foundation Establishment stage and below. It's just that Exchange Thunder Palace mainly recruited female cultivators, while Gen Thunder Palace recruited young male cultivators. -6. Chapter 15-14. After hearing about the 8 great Thunder Palaces of the Imperial Thunder Sect and thinking about Shang Huoming's 3.5 disciples, Xiaohua sighed with emotion. There was no need to say anything. Shang Huoming's fate was to be exterminated by the 100 Grass Sect, but the Imperial Thunder Sect only needed to recruit a single disciple, and the 3 great cultivation sects of the state of Shi only dared to send disciples to intercept them, not daring to openly provoke them. Right. Why did only fellow Taoist Shui come to Misty Mountain? Xiaohua looked around and whispered, how could Senior Ling give up such a good opportunity? Shui smiled bitterly. The reason, could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao doesn't know? I know? Xiaohua was slightly stunned. He pointed at his nose and said in bewilderment, how could I know about your Misty Mountain? Looking at Xiaohua's bewilderment and the tens of thousands of cultivators on Thunderclap Peak, Shui felt a burst of guilt. Yes, she was only at the 8th level of qi condensation. Although she could rank in the front among these tens of thousands of cultivators, the Imperial Thunder Sect only recruited 10 disciples. It was simply impossible for her. Look at Xiaohua, he was at the 10th level of qi condensation. His chances of passing the selection were several times higher than hers. As long as Xiaohua passed the selection, he would become a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. For Imperial Thunder Sect disciples, Foundation Establishment was just within reach. And for Misty Mountain, a Foundation Establishment cultivator was truly a colossus. Thinking for a moment, Shui clenched her teeth and sent out a silence talisman. She smiled apologetically and said, fellow Taoist Xiao, actually. Then, Shui actually spoke of Ling Jingyi's thoughts in full detail. She didn't hide anything. Unexpectedly, Xiaohua wasn't as angry as she imagined. There wasn't even a trace of expression on his face. Perhaps there was only a trace of a strange expression in his eyes. Could it be? Shui suddenly felt a burst of absurdity in her heart. She couldn't help but whisper, could it be that fellow Taoist Xiao already knew? Moreover, when that fire ape escaped from the earth fire, fellow Taoist Xiao was nearby. Hee, Xiaohua laughed. I was only at the 4th level of qi condensation that day. How could I dare to appear in front of a Foundation Establishment cultivator? Furthermore, I didn't know about it because of this. Otherwise, they wouldn't have come to the Imperial Thunder Sect without knowing that the Misty Mountain's disciples had suffered heavy casualties. Thus, Xiaohua didn't hide anything and told him about what he had heard in the Flame Forest Swamp. Ling Chengya. This guy is actually a member of Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pooh family. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Shui gnashed her teeth, wishing she could immediately send a message to Misty Mountain. Don't tell me that the Flying Phoenix Ridge doesn't have any spies from the Misty Mountain? Xiaohua laughed. Shui was embarrassed, but she didn't say anything. All right, fellow Taoist Shui, rest early. There's a selection tomorrow. As long as fellow Taoist passes the selection, What's the point of being afraid of flying Phoenix Ridge? Xiaohua advised. Yes, I was too focused. Shue cupped her hands and said, the matter of the magic tools ends here. I will inform Uncle when I have the chance. Those things are all fellow Taoist Zhao's. My Misty Mountain will never mention another word to fellow Taoist Xiao. And Xiaohua slightly nodded. Seeing Xiaohua's somewhat indifferent appearance, Shue once again said in a low voice, the fire ape is a spirit beast comparable to late-stage Foundation establishment. If fellow Taoist Xiao is able to subdue it, it can be said to be a great help. Fellow Taoist Xiao, don't be careless. This magic tool is precisely the fire ape's soul-suppressing magic tool. As long as fellow Taoist Xiao comprehends the method within, you can definitely subdue the fire ape. Xiaohua waved his hand and said, fellow Taoist Shue, just as you said, the fire ape is late-stage Foundation establishment. If I want to subdue it, I'm afraid that I's cultivation must also be late-stage Foundation establishment. I don't need to say what happened to Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pu Jianyuan and Misty Mountain's Uncle Gu A who subdued the fire ape. They both failed. I haven't thought about it at all. Shue's face turned red. That's right, people's greed is the most terrifying. When they see something useful, they want to take it for themselves. They never consider their own ability. Flying Phoenix Ridge's Pu Jianyuan lost the fire ape's soul-suppressing magic tool only because he was a bit greedier than Ling Jingyi of Misty Mountain. Now that it has fallen into Xiaohua's hands, he can no longer have the opportunity to subdue the fire ape. And right now, Xiaohua's cultivation is even worse than Pu Jianyuan's. Shue's persuasion. Doesn't it have another meaning? All right, fellow Taoist Shue, remove this silence talisman. Xiaohua said with a smile. I know what you mean. The fire ape's chances will depend on the future. Yes. Shue removed the silence talisman. The two closed their eyes and adjusted their breathing, quietly waiting for the arrival of dawn. Gradually, the night became even darker. Xiaohua closed his eyes and cultivated. The dragon transformation art within his body was still circulating. After these 2 years of cultivation, the dragon transformation art had a little bit of success. The current Xiaohua could barely control his meridians, and could enlarge and shrink them a bit. Of course, compared to the little white dragon in the past, which could casually expand into a dragon and shrink into a snake, there was still a huge difference. But just this alone let Xiaohua know that he didn't cultivate the dragon transformation art incorrectly. However, cultivating the dragon transformation art caused Xiaohua to have new doubts. Because following the cultivation of the dragon transformation art, Xiaohua had gradually sensed more meridians. And these meridians were not recorded in the heavenly law embodiment technique. Although Xiaohua was still not sure how many meridians there were, he already knew that these meridians, whether big or small, were extremely numerous. Could it be these meridians are for the Foundation establishment stage, Gold Core stage? I need to temper them in the future? Many times, Xiaohua would ask himself this. Unfortunately, Xiaohua didn't have any Foundation establishment stage techniques, so it was impossible for him to have any explanation. At this time, Xiaohua was cultivating as usual. The alien starlight ignored the restrictions outside the thunderclap peak and directly shot down. The reverse light also stopped revolving, absorbing the starlight like a bottomless black hole. Xiaohua had already recovered his ashen white bones, and was absorbing the starlight 3 times faster than before. There seems to be divine sense. While Xiaohua was cultivating, suddenly, dozens of divine senses were sent out from the thunderclap peak, sweeping in several directions like a waterfall. Xiaohua opened his eyes. The reverse light in the space returned to its original state, and the alien starlight also disappeared. At the same time that Xiaohua opened his eyes, several middle and late 11th level Qi refining cultivators also discovered the divine senses. These cultivators were all outstanding cultivators from cultivation families. Although they hadn't reached the peak of the 12th level of Qi refining, they had all taken pills similar to the revolving illumination pill from their families, and had long since developed their divine senses. At this time, although their divine senses had yet to take shape, it wasn't difficult for them to sense the divine senses of others. The divine senses sweeping across the peak were very fast, but they were fast and not chaotic. Almost every cultivator's body was slightly paused, as if they were choosing something. One of the divine senses naturally swept across Xiaohua's body, but that divine sense only swept slightly, and then immediately swept past, sweeping toward Xue Xue. Xue Xue was cultivating at this time, so she didn't know. After the divine sense swept past Xue Xue, it paused for a moment, then swept again several times, and then continued to sweep below. Moreover, when the divine sense swept across Xue Xue's body, Xiaohua suddenly felt a strange fluctuation. What's going on? Xiaohua was a bit puzzled. Before the divine sense left Xue Xue's body, Xiaohua very recklessly released his perception, wanting to see what the fluctuation was. Unfortunately, Xiaohua looked for a long time, but didn't see any clues. Strange. Xiaohua scratched his head, but suddenly, Xiaohua woke up. Damn it. What's so strange? Isn't this a divine sense marking? When Shanghua Sect's Qiayu was tracking me, didn't he use this divine sense marking? If it wasn't for that empress, I would have already fallen into their hands. How did this divine sense mark Xue Xue's body? AI, is there still a need to say? Didn't Xue Xue say it before? Misty Mountain and a disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect have a very deep relationship. Presumably this is the master that disciple entrusted. Xiao Hua's heart was bitter, and he thought of the fourth-level qi refining Yutong he met in the Rinsing Flower sect. Comparing people to people is infuriating. Thinking that he was already at the 10th level of qi refining, but still couldn't enter the eyes of the Imperial Thunder sect, and Xue Xue was just at the 7th level of qi refining, and was chosen by the master of the Imperial Thunder sect before she was selected. Xiao Hua's heart had a trace of jealousy, a trace of helplessness, and even more bitterness. Just as Xiao Hua was looking around in self-pity, suddenly, Xiao Hua thought of something, and he immediately broke out in a cold sweat. Just now, I seem to have used my perception to explore their divine sense. They actually didn't discover it. Xiao Hua actually used his own perception to explore when they used their divine sense to mark Xue Xue Xue. What made Xiao Hua feel the most incomprehensible was that the divine sense actually didn't detect it. What's going on? Xiao Hua was alarmed, and he thought again. Could it be this perception that I cultivate? Isn't it the embryonic form of divine sense? After all, Xiao Hua's perception was something that he used some nameless chant to cultivate when he was at the 4th level of qi refining. This had never been heard of in the cultivation world of the Dawn Rain continent. Immediately, Xiao Hua was ecstatic. Ha. This is great. This young master can perceive divine sense, but divine sense can't perceive this young master. This is such a wonderful thing. However, while he was happy, Xiao Hua was also apprehensive. Since this perception was different from divine sense, then what about true divine sense? How would Xiao Hua cultivate in the future? When Xiao Hua reached the 12th level of qi refining, where would his divine sense come from? Could it be that there would be another type of divine sense? My head hurts. Xiao Hua really frowned. He raised his eyes to look at the cultivators all over the mountain. His perception was still sweeping down the mountain like the wind, and Xiao Hua's mind was in chaos. Clearly, he wasn't in the mood to cultivate in peace. Time flew by quickly, and the sky to the east showed a smear of white, and the sun began to gradually rise. Many cultivators sat facing the east and began to breathe, using different methods to absorb the essence of the sun. What can I do? Let's go and see. Xiao Hua shrugged his shoulders, and a trace of laziness appeared on his face. He opened his mouth, and a bit of essence was sucked into his mouth. Fellow Taoist Xiao, Xue Xue suddenly exclaimed from the side. -6. Chapter 15:15. Fellow Taoist Xiao, Xue Xue called out in a low voice, giving Xiao Hua a big fright. He suddenly came to his senses and looked all around. The languid expression on his face had long since disappeared. But when he saw that there wasn't the slightest bit of abnormality around him, he turned his head and asked curiously, Fellow Taoist Xue, is there something wrong? No, nothing. Xue Xue's face blushed and her eyes flickered. She hurriedly covered it up and said, I just woke up and casually called fellow Taoist Xiao. Is that so? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. But when he looked around again, there was indeed nothing to pay attention to. When he wanted to ask more, his gaze was attracted by a few children in front of him. Those children were only 4 or 5 years old. Beside them, there were a few low-level refinement middle-aged men accompanying them. Their faces were full of spirit, and they were curiously looking around. Fellow Taoist Xue, are these children also participating in the selection? Xiaohua pointed and asked. Oh, those children. Xue's face was still slightly flustered. She used her hand to stroke the hair in front of her forehead and laughed softly. Of course. Didn't I say last night? The first test of the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple selection is to test the attributes of the body. As long as one has the lightning attribute, they will be accepted by the Imperial Thunder Sect. These children are young. Their body attributes should meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect, right? If it is a fight, how can they be the opponent of others? Oh, Xiaohua nodded. Recruiting 4 or 5-year-old children was a common method of all sections. The Imperial Thunder Sect was naturally not an exception. Looking at Xiaohua, Xue's heart was churning. Fellow Taoist Xiao, why did he return to his old self? He looks really ordinary like this. If he was always like that, lazy, how good would that be? Although Xiaohua's perception was powerful, he still could not penetrate Xue's heart. How could he know what Xue was thinking? At this time, the sun had already risen high in the east, illuminating the entire Thunderclap Peak with golden light. Looking outside from the foot of the Thunderclap Peak, it was no different from usual. There was no restriction at all. And at this time, the light of the round ball that was used as a moonstone last night was gradually disappearing. Only traces of lightning still appeared from time to time. Fellow Taoists, suddenly, a deafening voice resounded throughout the Thunderclap Peak. This sudden voice startled Xiaohua. What level of cultivation was this? That voice was deep and resounding, like rolling thunder that spread throughout the entire Thunderclap Peak, causing all the cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak to be shocked. However, this, fellow Taoists, left Xiaohua puzzled, and when the second sentence was heard, Xiaohua couldn't help but smile. Thank you all for coming to my Imperial Thunder Sect. I am Jin Yiming, a disciple of Jinlei Palace. I will be in charge of today's selection. As it turned out, this voice was coming from the many balls in the air. No wonder it could be heard everywhere. It was clear that the cultivation level of this voice was profound. The first test is to test your physical attributes. If you meet the requirements of the Lightning Controlling Sect, the disciples of the Lightning Controlling Sect will give you a numbered medallion. This medallion will be used to identify you in the disciple selection. When the selection is over, the disciples who didn't pass the selection can take this token with them. Let me tell you, fellow Taoists, this token contains a defensive yellow talisman. Perhaps it can save your life when you're in danger. Upon hearing this last sentence, Xiaohua smiled even more. This tone and the faint pride in these words were probably not something a Foundation Establishment senior would reveal. All right, fellow Taoists, please stand where you are and don't move. The disciples of Jinlei Palace and Converging Thunder Palace will appear by your side soon. The voice was slightly exaggerated and even dragged out. As the voice fell, the many balls in the air emitted dazzling lightning. As the lightning flashed, several small figures appeared in each of the balls. These figures were like pieces of light that flashed across the entire Thunderclap Peak. However, among these light figures, there were many boys and girls around the 6th layer of Qi refining who were no more than 11 or 12 years old, who landed on the foothills of the Thunderclap Peak. Although these boys were a bit young, they were all extraordinary. Needless to say, the boys and girls were all pretty and delicate. With a single glance, one could tell that they were people with excellent foundations. Just by standing there, they had an extraordinary bearing, which made the tens of thousands of cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak admire them. Fellow Taoists, I have been sent by my senior brother to test your physical attributes. I hope that you will cooperate. The boys, regardless of whether they were facing a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator or a 1st layer Qi refining cultivator, all bowed respectfully and spoke in a humble tone. Xiaohua and the others secretly cheered in their hearts and also bowed respectfully. All right, fellow Taoists, Please test according to the arrangement of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Fellow Taoists who have not passed the test, please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. My Jinlei Palace disciples will escort you out of the mountain. The voice sounded again. Immediately after, a young cultivator around 30 years old wearing a purple Taoist robe with a 12th layer Qi refining cultivation appeared in the air. This young cultivator's face was crimson red and his forehead was full. He wore a slight smile on his face and very conceitedly looked towards the Thunderclap Peak. This is Jin Yiming. Xiao Hua had long felt it. He stood in the middle of the group of cultivators and narrowed his eyes. 30 years old, 12th layer Qi refining. Compared to Li Zongbao, he is still lacking. I am now in the 10th layer Qi refining. In another 10 years, I should be able to reach the 12th layer Qi refining. At that time, I's age seems to be hard to calculate. If we count from the time I was 18 years old at Yellow Flower Ridge, I should be 23 years old right now. But I still seem to be 18 years old. If I tell people that I am still 18 years old, they should be able to deceive them. Even if I reach the 12th layer Qi refining at 33 years old, I can still be considered amazing. Not to mention Xiao Hua's narcissism. The children of the Jinlei Palace and the converted Thunder Palace had already started testing the cultivator's attributes. Sure enough, as Shui said, the magic tool of the Imperial Thunder Sect was different from usual. It was not in the shape of a ball, but rather in the shape of a flute. At one end of the flute, there was a handle-like groove. Fellow Taoist, please use your hand to hold the groove of the mirror spirit. Do not use magic power. The child closest to Xiao Hua was a girl from the converted Thunder Palace. Her voice was very clear and pleasant to the ears. At this moment, she was talking to an 8th layer Qi refining cultivator several zhang away. The male cultivator cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Many thanks, fellow Taoist. I want to see if I meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect." With that said, the cultivator took the mirror spirit from the girl's hand and placed his hand on the groove. A strange thing happened. A light blue brilliance appeared from the groove in the cultivator's hand and slowly spread to the other side. However, after just a few inches, the light blue brilliance stopped and refused to move forward. When the male cultivator saw this, although he didn't know how to use the mirror spirit, he knew something was wrong when he saw that the light blue brilliance occupied less than half of the entire mirror spirit. Without waiting for the male cultivator to speak, the girl said with a smile, "My apologies, fellow Taoist. You don't meet the requirements of our Imperial Thunder Sect. Please go to the west side of the shocking Thunder Peak. In a moment, a senior martial brother from the Jinlei Palace will escort you out of the mountain." The male cultivator wanted to ask for the reason, but when he saw the girl's hand, he let out a sigh and handed the mirror spirit over. He then turned around and walked to the west. A 5-year-old boy next to the male cultivator blinked his eyes and cutely asked, big sister, how about I take the test?" A second-layer Qi condensation cultivator next to the boy poked him and scolded, "Call her fellow Taoist." The boy pouted and looked at the cultivator with a wronged expression. He helplessly said, "Fellow Taoist, big sister." Everyone around them burst out laughing. The cultivator's expression was very unnatural. He glared at the boy and said, "Little brother, you want to take the test too? You have to perform well. If you don't pass, big sister won't let you pass." The girl saw how cute the boy was and smiled like a flower. She handed the mirror spirit over. When the boy's chubby hand grabbed the mirror spirit, a ray of purple and red light appeared. It was extremely dazzling and flowed to the other side of the mirror spirit like water. It only stopped halfway through the mirror spirit. "Excellent." The girl clapped and smiled. "Little brother, you are the first person big sister took today." Really?" The boy didn't say anything, but the cultivator was so happy that he almost jumped up. "Little brother, give the mirror spirit to big sister." The girl smiled and asked, "How old are you this year?" The boy handed the mirror spirit to the girl and smiled. "I am 5 years old and 2 years old." 5 years old and 2 years old? The girl was clearly stunned and asked, "Then you are 7 years old?" The cultivator quickly explained, No, he is 5 years old this year. He just had his birthday 2 months ago." Ha ha ha. The girl was clearly amused. She covered her mouth and laughed. Okay, since little brother is only 5 years old, he doesn't need to pass the second test. Oh right, fellow Taoist. Is he fellow Taoists? The girl turned and asked the cultivator. He is I's son, my son. The cultivator happily said, has he cultivated any techniques? Yes, yes. I taught him the basic techniques half a year ago. He is almost at the first layer of chi refining. The cultivator proudly said, You taught him a technique? The girl frowned. What? Did I do something wrong? The cultivator became anxious. Of course you did something wrong. Very wrong. The girl mercilessly said, What technique is your technique? What technique is my Imperial Thunder Sect's technique? Is it better to use your technique to let this child enter the sect, or use my Imperial Thunder Sect's technique to let him enter the sect? The cultivator's face turned ashen after hearing this. -6. Chapter 15:16. Fortunately, he hasn't entered the first layer of chi refining yet. Moreover, he has a thunder attribute physique, so he meets the requirements of my Imperial Thunder Sect. Otherwise, as the girl spoke, she patted her hand and took out a message talisman from her storage pouch. She used her magic power to activate it, and it flew away. Then she said to the cultivator, Fellow Taoist, are you also participating in the selection? Me? The cultivator pointed at his nose and bitterly smiled, Eyes, age, and cultivation. How can I enter the Imperial Thunder Sect? He, fellow Taoist, is quite self-aware. However, this is a rare opportunity for my Imperial Thunder Sect. Anyone who comes to my Thunderclap Peak can take the test. Fellow Taoist might as well give it a try. The girl spoke in an orderly manner, causing the people nearby to be convinced. Even though Xiao Hua was a bit far away, he could still inwardly nod his head. Hearing this, the cultivator also nodded his head and took the mirror spirit. After taking it, a dark red light flashed and slowly flowed less than an inch before stopping. When the cultivator saw this, his face flushed red. Oh, fellow Taoist is of the fire attribute. The girl nodded her head and said, Fellow Taoist, you can try activating your magic power. I can activate magic power? Why didn't that cultivator move aside? Xiao Hua's eyes turned, and he understood. That cultivator just now had a light blue brilliance. According to the 5 elements, it should be of the water attribute. It was the opposite of the Imperial Thunder Sect's cultivation method, so there was naturally no need to use magic power. The cultivator activated his magic power, but when the cultivator's face flushed red, the light red light only moved half an inch. All right, fellow Taoist, you don't meet the requirements of my Imperial Thunder Sect. Please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. The girl took the mirror spirit with a smile and spoke very naturally. But what about my son? He doesn't seem to have received a command medallion yet? The cultivator looked at the boy with reluctance and asked pitifully, This little brother is below 5 years old and doesn't need to pass the second and third tests. Therefore, you don't need to give out a token. I have already sent a message to the senior martial brothers in Zhenlei Palace. They will send people over to pick this junior martial brother up. Zhenlei Palace will have a special test for this junior martial brother. This test is very simple. If you follow it shouldn't be a problem. Oh, that's right. This is the token of a relative of a disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Take it and register it in the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciplinary hall. The external affairs disciple of the disciplinary hall will explain to you how to visit this junior martial brother in the future. The girl clapped her hands, and a small square token was handed over to the cultivator. Good. The cultivator's face was filled with tears as he stroked the boy's hair a few times and whispered, Awa, listen to your senior sisters in the Imperial Thunder Sect. Cultivate well for your father. You must make your father proud. The boy seemed to understand, but he didn't. He opened his eyes wide and nodded obediently. While they were talking, a 10th layer chi refining cultivator flew out from the nearest ball and landed beside the girl. Senior martial brother Jin Yun, it's this boy. The girl cupped her hands and bowed. She pointed at the boy and said, The cultivator looked at the boy, and without another word, he reached out and grabbed the boy's arm. Then, he flew into the air and entered the ball. Awah! The boy's father stopped after chasing for half a step and couldn't help but call out in a low voice. Xiaohua watched from afar. On the entire Thunderclap Mountain, there were also a few disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect flying out from several places. They also brought a few boys and girls into the ball. Innate attributes are still the most important. Xiaohua sighed inwardly. Fellow Xiao, you don't have to be envious. Seeing this, Xue smiled and said, although this boy is of the Thunder attribute and can cultivate the cultivation method of the Imperial Thunder sect, it's only a possibility. As for whether he can cultivate or not, it'll still depend on his future cultivation to prove it. And then, is there a method that can be used like testing the 5 elements? As long as it can be tested, it'll definitely be able to cultivate? Xiaohua suddenly thought of something and asked, Fellow Xiao, this is a good question. Xue was stunned and said, I have never thought of this before. Ha ha ha, I was just casually saying it. Xiaohua said with a smile. After the boy's father left, the female disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect continued to test the other cultivators. The next few cultivators didn't have the Thunder attribute or the Fire attribute. Although one of them was yellow in color, that cultivator said, Fellow Taoist, I have always cultivated the Fire attribute cultivation method. Moreover, the elders in the clan also said that I have the Fire attribute. Can you let I activate my magic power? The girl shook her head and said, Fellow Taoist, my Imperial Thunder sect naturally recruits disciples based on my Imperial Thunder sect spirit. Even if fellow Taoist believes that you have the Thunder attribute, if my spirit can't flash a purple light, then you can't have the Thunder attribute. Then, she looked at that cultivator's cultivation and said softly, Moreover, even if fellow Taoist is of the Thunder attribute, with such a young age and cultivation, I'm afraid that you won't be able to pass the second and third tests. Fellow Taoist should go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. Ah, there's a third test? Xiaohua was stunned and turned to look at Xue. As expected, Xue's face was also filled with surprise. The next cultivator was of the Fire attribute. A blood-colored light traveled for about 2 inches. That cultivator's face turned ugly, but the girl didn't think so and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist is of the Fire attribute. You can activate your magic power. That cultivator activated his magic power and the blood-colored light, as if taking a Peiyuan pill, suddenly traveled 50% of the distance. Good. Fellow Taoist, congratulations on passing the first test. Seeing this, the girl clapped her hands and took out a number plate from her storage pouch. She lowered her head and looked at it, then handed it over. Fellow Taoist's number plate is number 24. Please keep it well. Ha ha, ha ha ha. That cultivator's hands were trembling. He still didn't believe it and took the number plate. He brought his arm to his mouth and fiercely bit it. Ouch! By the time that cultivator cried out in pain, the girl had already taken the spirit mirror to test the next cultivator. Although the process of the test was very simple, there were really too many cultivators on the Thunderclap Peak. That was tens of thousands of cultivators, There were probably over 100 cultivators surrounding the girl. Xiaohua and Xue were standing not too far away from the girl. Seeing that less than 10% of the cultivators passed the test, and the other 90% of the cultivators left dejectedly for the west side of the Thunderclap Peak, their hearts were also restless. The first test of the Imperial Thunder sect actually didn't look at cultivation, only the body's attribute. Moreover, the way they determined the attribute was different from outside. Many cultivators also thought that they were of the Fire attribute, but they were all denied by the girl. Therefore, Xiaohua's heart was restless. Previously, when Xiaohua was at Yellow Flower Ridge, he didn't test any attribute. He even tested that he was of the Water attribute. It was only later that he learned that he was of the Fire attribute when he practiced the raising fire to burning heaven. Unfortunately, the Imperial Thunder sect didn't allow him to use his magic power at the beginning of the test. Xiaohua seemed to have seen the light blue brilliance of the spirit mirror when he received it. For hours passed very quickly. The number of people around the girl became fewer and fewer. Almost everyone had passed the test. The girl raised her head, looked around, and said with a smile, "Is there anyone else who hasn't taken the test? Fellow Taoists, don't think that you're lucky. In a while, my Imperial Thunder sect will conduct the second test. If you don't get a token, when the restriction of the Thunderclap Peak activates, you will lose your life." Sure enough, as the girl said, there were a few people hiding at the side who wanted to make up the numbers. At this time, they had no choice but to come out and take the test. "Let's go, fellow Taoist Shui. Even if we have to wait until the end, we still have to take the test." Xiao Hua looked at Shui Shui, who was also a little flustered, and said in a low voice, "AI, let's go together." Shui Shui replied, "I have the Earth attribute. I'm afraid I won't be able to pass this test." When Xiao Hua and Shui Shui arrived at the girl's side, the few cultivators who passed off as fish eyes had already dejectedly headed to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. "Fellow Taoists, who will go first?" The girl had already seen Xiao Hua and Shui Shui and asked with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Shui, you go first." Xiao Hua took half a step back and said with a smile, "Okay." Shui Shui smiled bitterly. She stretched out her white and tender right hand and took the spirit mirror from the girl. Shui Shui closed her eyes. Ah! Just when Shui Shui closed her eyes, a sound of astonishment immediately came from all around. "Fellow Taoist Shui, you have the lightning attribute. Quickly open your eyes." Xiao Hua's cheerful and envious voice sounded in Shui Shui's ears. "Ah, really?" Shui Shui's heart was immediately filled with joy. She couldn't wait to open her eyes. Sure enough, the spirit mirror in Shui Shui's hand was emitting a bright purple-red brilliance. That brilliance was already more than half of its length. Hee, congratulations, fellow Taoist. You have the mythical thunder physique, which is precisely the requirement to become a disciple of my Imperial Thunder sect. Please take this token and wait for the second test. The girl clapped her hands and smiled. She took out the token from her storage pouch and handed it to Shui Shui. Then, she took the spirit mirror from Shui Shui's hand and turned to Xiao Hua and said, "Fellow Taoist, you should be the last one to take the test. Please take the test. The second test of my Imperial Thunder sect should begin in an hour." Xiao Hua looked at the spirit mirror in front of him and took a deep breath. He nodded slightly and said, "Yes, I will take the test now." However, Xiao Hua stretched out his hand, but before he could touch the spirit mirror, he stopped again. There was a feeling of loss and gain in his heart. Hee, fellow Taoist, you're already at the 10th layer of the Qi refinement realm, but your Tao heart is still not stable? If this continues for a long time, I'm afraid your realm will become unstable. The girl smiled sweetly and stuffed the spirit mirror into Xiao Hua's hand. However, a strange thing finally happened again. That spirit mirror in Xiao Hua's hand actually didn't have the slightest reaction. It was exactly the same as when the girl held it in her hand just now. The girl frowned slightly and said in displeasure, "Fellow Taoist, don't try to show off some divine ability. If this spirit mirror doesn't have any reaction, you will also be eliminated. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -6. Chapter 15-17. Seeing that the situation he was most worried about was indeed happening again, Xiao Hua inwardly cursed. However, he shook the mirror spirit in his hand again and again, but the mirror spirit still didn't move at all. Seeing Xiao Hua like this, the girl very justly smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoist, wait a moment, fellow Taoist." Seeing that the girl was about to announce his elimination, Xiao Hua immediately said anxiously, "I didn't use any secret technique to hide my attribute. This mirror spirit, is it broken? Think about it. I came all the way to the Thunderclap Peak. How could I possibly make things difficult for myself?" The girl looked at Xiao Hua. Sure enough, he didn't show any signs of using magic power. She immediately scratched her head and said, "That's right, this concealment technique was only taught by Martial Uncle half a year ago. Even this poor Taoist had to practice for several months before being able to grasp it. How do you know the secret technique of my Imperial Thunder sect? Could it be, it's really broken?" As she spoke, the girl took the mirror spirit. The magic power in her body slightly moved and a faint purple light flashed on the mirror spirit. That light quickly rushed to the mirror spirit's position about 60%. The girl's expression slightly changed. She didn't hand the mirror spirit over to Xiao Hua and only said, "Fellow Taoist, I'm very sorry. You don't meet the conditions for my Imperial Thunder sect to recruit disciples. Fellow Taoist, please go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. In a moment, my Jinlei Palace's senior brothers will." Xiao Hua was naturally very anxious and said loudly, "Fellow Taoist, I was watching from the side just now. I only know that among the 5 elements, cultivators with metal, wood, water, and earth attributes don't meet the conditions for your sect to recruit disciples. But I didn't hear that cultivators with no attributes don't meet the conditions for your sect to recruit disciples. How about you let me try again by pouring magic power into the mirror spirit?" The girl slightly shook her head and said in all seriousness, "Fellow Taoist is wrong. I received an order from my master that those with lightning, wind, yin, yang, and other extremely rare attributes can all pass the first round of selection. Those with fire attributes can pour magic power into the mirror spirit to test the strength of the fire attribute. If it's more than half, they can pass. However, they never said that cultivators with no attributes can pass the selection." Xiao Hua shakes his head. "But your esteemed teacher didn't seem to say that if the mirror spirit didn't react, we shouldn't try again using transcendence energy, right?" The girl shook her head like a rattle drum. "I have never heard of a physique with balanced 5 elements, much less a physique without any 5 elements. Fellow Taoist, you don't meet the requirements of my Imperial Thunder sect. Please leave the mountain as soon as possible." "Motherfucker," Xiao Hua was furious. However, the other party was only a 12-year-old girl. Perhaps she was a genius in cultivation, but in terms of conduct, he was afraid that he couldn't ask for too much. Just as the little girl turned around and was about to leave, Xiao Hua's figure moved slightly, and like a gust of wind, he stretched out his hand and seized the mirror spirit. The girl was shocked. It wasn't that she didn't pay attention to the outside world, but she had been busy for more than 2 hours. Her previous curiosity had long disappeared, and she had already felt a little sleepy and had lost some of her vigilance. The most important thing was that Xiao Hua's movements were too fast, and there wasn't even a trace of spiritual power fluctuation. Before she could react, the mirror spirit was already in Xiao Hua's hands. "What are you doing?" The girl abruptly turned around, clapped her hands, and shouted with a thunderous voice. But just as she said these words, a scene that made the surrounding people dumbfounded appeared. The mirror spirit in Xiao Hua's hands suddenly flashed with an extremely brilliant purple-red brilliance. That brilliance was like the scorching sun at noon, dazzling everyone's eyes. Before the girl could say a second sentence, she heard Xiao Hua say in a very panicked voice, "What's going on?" Immediately, that scorching sun flew into the air, and with a boom, that scorching sun actually exploded in midair. Ah? Not only was the girl dumbstruck, but Shui, who was sweating profusely for Xiao Hua, and the surrounding cultivators who were watching the show were all dumbstruck as they stood there. Xiao Hua's face was even more embarrassed, and he was at a loss for what to do. "You dare to destroy I's mirror spirit." The girl immediately understood, and the tears in her eyes immediately gushed out. She clapped her hands, and several 5 lightning yellow talismans flashed with traces of purple lightning and scattered towards Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua knew that he was in the wrong. His figure moved slightly, and he quickly dodged the lightning talisman. In midair, he called out very innocently, "Fellow Taoist." This poor Taoist only poured in a trace of magic power. "This mirror spirit of your sect is really weak. You still dare to quibble. It must be because you were eliminated by my Imperial Thunder sect, and your heart was dirty, so you destroyed my Imperial Thunder sect's magic tool." How could the girl be willing to let it go? Her mouth berated, and her hands didn't stop. One of her hands took out a yellow talisman from her storage bag, and the other hand used palm lightning and other spells to bombard Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua was helpless, and he couldn't fight back. He could only use his flying technique to shuttle between the girl's spells and painstakingly think of a way to escape. "Dui Ling, what's going on?" A voice came from midair. It was Jin Yiming, who was in charge of the first round of selection. "Senior brother Jin." Seeing Jin Yiming come over, Dui Ling's small mouth became even more depressed, and he almost cried. This guy destroyed this disciple's mirror spirit. Senior brother Jin, you have to help this disciple. Don't let this disciple go back to master to be punished. Sweat. Xiaohua felt ashamed in his heart. Of course, he had earned a trace of a chance to pass the Imperial Thunder Sect selection, but this chance came at the cost of destroying Dui Ling's magic tool. He had really let her down. However, after Xiaohua felt ashamed, he also loudly complained about the injustice. It was just as he said. He had only poured his magic power into the mirror spirit, and although he didn't have the trace, he said, but who would have thought? The light that appeared was so bright, and the speed of the light was so fast. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to the other side of the mirror spirit, and the origin of the mirror spirit wasn't enough. The entire mirror spirit shook violently, and the light seemed to want to break through the mirror spirit. Xiaohua hurriedly withdrew his magic power, but the light was still there, and the vibration was still there. He could only throw the mirror spirit into the air. Don't cry. Today is a big event for the Imperial Thunder Sect. Everyone here is here for the first time, and there are many cultivators who didn't pass the selection. You're crying. Will make the Imperial Thunder Sect lose face. Jin Yiming glanced at Xiaohua and said to Dui Ling, hearing that it would affect the Imperial Thunder Sect's reputation. Dui Ling's face tensed up, and he hurriedly stretched out his arm to wipe away the tears on his face, revealing a tenacious expression. What's going on? How did you destroy the mirror spirit? Jin Yiming said coldly to Xiaohua. Although fellow Taoist came to the Imperial Thunder Sect to participate in the selection and is considered an important guest of the Imperial Thunder Sect, if you don't put the Imperial Thunder Sect in your eyes, we won't treat fellow Taoist with the hospitality of a guest. Oh, senior brother Jin, disciple Xue Xue was at the side the whole time. Xue Xue hurriedly stepped forward. Jin Yiming glanced at the number plate in Xue Xue's hand and didn't refute. He nodded and said, Yes, Xue Xue, tell me about it. Xue Xue recounted everything that had happened just now, without adding or deleting any details. Hearing Xue Xue's words, Jin Yiming frowned and looked at Xiaohua with a complicated gaze. He then turned to ask Dui Ling, Is what fellow Taoist Xue said true? Yes, what fellow Taoist Xue said is true. Dui Ling nodded and said, This cultivator called Xiaohua doesn't have the lightning attribute, nor the fire attribute. He also doesn't have any other rare attributes. Therefore, disciple followed the orders of my teacher and eliminated him. But, your teacher. Jin Yiming was halfway through his sentence when he saw Dui Ling's eyes turn red again. How would he dare to continue? He knew that they were just inexperienced children who treated the words of their teacher as the golden rule and didn't know how to be flexible. He rephrased his words and said, Cultivators with balanced 5 elements should have a white brilliance during the test. Didn't the teacher of the Imperial Thunder Sect mention it? Dui Ling's face was blank as he shook his head and said, They didn't mention it. Oh, it's no wonder. There is only one person with balanced 5 elements in this world. My Imperial Thunder Sect has never encountered such a person when recruiting disciples. If I wasn't in charge of the first round of selection this year, and specially read through all the ancient records, I might not have known about it. Jin Yiming sighed. So you don't blame me? Dui Ling raised his small face and smiled through his tears. No. Leave this fellow Taoist to senior brother. Do you have any other cultivators to test? Jin Yiming smiled. No, this is the last one, Dui Ling said with a smile. The panic on his face had long disappeared. Jin Yiming turned to Xiaohua and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, I have never seen a cultivator with balanced 5 elements, but a cultivator without any 5 elements, let alone I. Even my teacher's ancient records don't have any records of such a person. Could it be that fellow Taoist is an anomaly? As he spoke, Jin Yiming clapped his hands and took out another mirror spirit. He handed it over and said, Fellow Taoist, don't use your magic power. Let I take a look. Yes. Xiaohua accepted it. Just as Xue Xue said, the mirror spirit didn't move at all. There wasn't even a trace of light flashing, not even the so-called white light. Strange. Fellow Taoist Xiao, could it be that you are really an anomaly? Although Jin Yiming had already stopped Xue Xue's description, seeing that the mirror spirit didn't move and Xiao Hua didn't have any magic power fluctuations around him, he couldn't help but ask in astonishment, "Do you need I to channel my magic power?" Xiao Hua probed. "Fellow Taoist, please wait." Jin Yiming shook his head and asked again, "Since fellow Taoist is already at Qi refining stage 10, then which sect do you belong to? What kind of cultivation technique do you practice?" This, Xiao Hua frowned slightly. The cultivation technique, Heavenly Laws Embodiment Technique, had caused a lot of trouble in Yin Yuan City. It was even related to the 1,000-year-old mother and son spirit fruit. He really didn't want to talk about it. "Oh, if you don't want to talk about the cultivation technique, then tell me which sect do you belong to?" Jin Yiming tactfully asked. "Fellow Taoist Jin, please know that I am a loose cultivator." Xiao Hua said helplessly, "I have practiced a fire-type cultivation technique called raising fire to the heavens." -6. Chapter 15:18. What? Loose cultivator? Jin Yiming was stunned and said with surprise, How is this possible?" Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "I am of course a loose cultivator. Otherwise, why would I enter the Imperial Thunder sect?" "May I ask how old you are?" Jin Yiming asked curiously. "I should be around 23 years old." Xiao Hua did not dare to lie and said truthfully, "Oh, then fellow Xiao must have taken some pill to retain your youth?" Jin Yiming was not surprised and looked at Xiao Hua with a smile. "Fellow Taoist is very lucky. Pills to retain one's youth are very hard to find in the cultivation world." "And yes, I guess." Xiao Hua's reply was very vague, but his heart was moved and he thought to himself, "I was wondering why my face did not change." So it was a pill to retain one's youth. It seems that it is really hard to find, otherwise I would have known. Pill to retain one's youth? Xue Xue's face was also filled with envy as she stared at Xiao Hua's young face in a daze. Of course, eternal youth was the highest realm that all women, regardless of whether they were immortal or mortal, pursued. "All right, fellow Taoist Xiao just said, what kind of fire attribute technique did you cultivate?" Jin Yiming asked again. Fellow Taoist Xiao, as a loose cultivator, actually reached the peak of Qi refining stage 10 at the age of 23. It can be said that you are a peerless genius. I am rather interested in fellow Taoist's technique. Raising fire to the heavens. Xiao Hua said with a smile. Raising fire to the heavens? Jin Yiming thought for a while and said curiously, I don't seem to have heard of such a technique. All right, I will let fellow Taoist Jin know. This is a shallow technique, Xiao Hua said with a strange smile. Jin Yiming looked at Xiao Hua as if he was considering the authenticity of Xiao Hua's words. However, the real thing was that his heart was in turmoil. No attributes. No attributes of the 5 elements. What does this mean? As the saying goes, jump out of the 3 realms and not in the 5 elements. Become a free immortal and live as long as the heavens. No attributes of the 5 elements. Doesn't that mean that you are not in the 5 elements? Of course, in the cultivation world of the Dawn Rain continent, there were no cultivators without attributes of the 5 elements. However, that did not mean that there were no legends of the 5 elements. No, it couldn't be said that it was the same as the legends, because those legends without the 5 elements were all stories of great divine abilities and great cultivators, but there had never been any records of low-level cultivators. But this little rogue cultivator in front of him actually had no attributes of any of the 5 elements. What could this mean? Perhaps he was a genius in cultivation, or perhaps he was trash in cultivation. Forget it. No matter what, this Xiao Hua can be considered a strange person. My Imperial Thunder sect has to be extra careful. Even if he's a piece of trash, I'm afraid he'll have to stay on my Sky Thunder Peak. Jin Yiming made up his mind. He looked at the dozens of cultivators who wanted to gather around him and waved his hand. This has nothing to do with you. You can leave now and find a place to rest. The second round of the test is about to begin. Today, we will be recruiting 100 disciples. Although the quota is 10 times more than before, the real test is yet to come. Yes, when the surrounding cultivators heard that Xiao Hua wanted to recruit 100 disciples, Their faces showed a pleasant surprise. How could they still care about what attribute Xiao Hua's physique was? Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow me. Zhen Yiming smiled and waved his hand, indicating for Xiao Hua to stand beside him. When Xiao Hua walked over, Dui Ling blinked her eyes and said, Senior Martial Brother Zhen, this disciple will also go over? Hee, Junior Martial Sister Dui Ling, your matter is already done. This Senior Martial Brother will report your matter to the Martial Ancestor. You can return with the other Senior Martial Brothers of the Converging Thunder Palace. After Zhen Yiming finished explaining everything, he waved his hand and cast out a spell that was flickering with lightning. A bright light flashed around the two of them. Following that, a bright light shot out from the nearest round ball, and the two of them disappeared from their original spot. Xiao Hua only felt his vision darken. When he opened his eyes again, his figure had actually appeared halfway up a mountain. He saw towering palaces, pavilions, and all kinds of winding corridors and small pavilions. Occasionally, immortal birds would chirp and fly out from the dense fog that was rising from the mountain. Oh my! It really is like a celestial place. Xiao Hua's eyes were envious, and he couldn't help but praise in his heart. Zhen Yiming sent out a communication talisman. When he saw the communication talisman flying out of the palace, Zhen Yiming smiled and said, Fellow Taoist Xiao, please follow me. I will listen to fellow Taoist Zhen's instructions. Xiao Hua cupped his hands and said. Then, Zhen Yiming led Xiao Hua through a few winding corridors and passed through a few clusters of exotic flowers and plants. Gradually, they walked into the white fog. The wisps of white mist were like smoke and cotton, drawing Xiao Hua's line of sight. A strange fragrance spread out from the little flowers on the ground, and Xiao Hua's ears actually recalled the melodious sound of a flute. Xiao Hua's eyes turned and saw that Zhen Yiming's footsteps were steady, and he seemed to have turned a deaf ear to the flute. He knew that Zhen Yiming was used to it. Xiao Hua couldn't help but be curious. Who was the person playing the flute? Yiming, what's the matter? The flute sound suddenly stopped, and a clear voice sounded. Zhen Yiming bowed respectfully and said in a concise manner, reporting to Martial Ancestor, during the first round of the disciple selection today, I discovered a cultivator without any of the 5 elements. Didn't have any of the 5 elements? The voice was clearly stunned, and he asked in surprise, Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. That cultivator held the mirror spirit in his hand, and the mirror spirit didn't have any reaction. Zhen Yiming said word by word. Furthermore, that cultivator poured his magic power into the mirror spirit, and the mirror spirit actually exploded. How is that possible? As he spoke, a figure suddenly appeared from the white fog and stood 10 feet away from Xiao Hua. A golden core cultivator? Although Xiao Hua was already mentally prepared when Zhen Yiming called him Martial Ancestor, when he saw that he couldn't detect that cultivator's cultivation, his heart couldn't help but jump. Previously, when he was on his way to Jinghua City, he had seen a golden core cultivator, but after all, it was only by chance, and he didn't have any direct knowledge of golden core cultivators. It could be said that the ignorant were fearless. After going through these 3 years of tempering, Xiao Hua had experienced the fierceness of peak aura refining realm cultivators and the fierceness of foundation building realm cultivators. As for the divine abilities of Jindan realm cultivators, he only needed to think with his heel to know. Without any hesitation, Xiao Hua bowed and said, Junior Xiao Hua greets Senior. That cultivator looked to be around 50 years old. He was thin, and the green robe he wore was very ordinary. The cultivator's face was clean, and his eyes were slightly sad. Half of his long black hair was already white, but the white hair didn't make his sharp eyebrows and eyes lose their color. Instead, it made him even more charming. The cultivator waved his hand and said faintly, it could be considered as returning the greeting. The sharp nails on his slender fingers were very eye-catching. Good boy, Xiao Hua's heart trembled. He had never seen a male cultivator with such long nails. Yiming, give him the mirror spirit, said the cultivator. Yes, Martial Ancestor. Zhen Yiming didn't dare to be negligent and hurriedly gave his mirror spirit to Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua took it and looked at the mirror spirit that didn't react. He then looked at the golden core cultivator. As expected, a strange expression flashed through the golden core cultivator's eyes. Then, He waved his hand casually. Xiao Hua felt his body tighten, and the true qi in his body was imprisoned. Hee, this mirror spirit really didn't react. The golden core cultivator waved his hand again, and the imprisonment on Xiao Hua's body suddenly disappeared. Pour your magic power into the mirror spirit. The golden core cultivator's tone was unquestionable. Yes, Junior. Xiao Hua wanted to remind him, but he immediately shut his mouth and carefully poured a strand of magic power into the mirror spirit. Sure enough, just like before, a bright purple-red light flashed and suddenly rushed to the top of the mirror spirit. It didn't allow Xiao Hua to withdraw his magic power. Seeing that the mirror spirit was about to explode again, Xiao Hua held it in his hand and didn't know whether to throw it away or not. It was very awkward. After all, he was an Aurus core stage cultivator. With a wave of his hand, Xiao Hua felt a wave of magic power. A restriction that flashed faintly with electric light was set up around the mirror spirit. Moreover, it seemed to have some kind of power. It took the mirror spirit from Xiao Hua's hand. Xiao Hua took the opportunity to release his hand and saw the light in the restriction scatter. Another mirror spirit was destroyed by Xiao Hua. When the light flashed, the golden core cultivator used his eyes to look at the remains of the mirror spirit. He nodded slightly and rubbed his hand. The lightning in the restriction flashed and all the remains turned into nothingness. Martial ancestor, Jin Yiming saw this and reminded, did Xiao Hua pass the first round? The second round of the disciple selection is about to begin. Nonsense. The golden core cultivator glared at Jin Yiming and said, although the mirror spirit showed that Xiao Hua didn't have any of the 5 elements, this mirror spirit is after all a low-grade magic tool. The result is only for reference. It can't be confirmed that Xiao Hua doesn't have any elements. But didn't you see it for yourself? Xiao Hua's fire attribute cultivation technique is very good. Even the mirror spirit couldn't determine the purity of his fire attribute. Such a cultivator couldn't pass the first round of the test. Could it be that the Imperial Thunder sect only accepts lightning attribute disciples? Yes. This disciple understands. Jin Yiming hurriedly bowed and replied. However, if he doesn't have any elements, the purity of his fire attribute cultivation technique shouldn't be so high, right? The golden core cultivator waved his hand and said, I will record this matter when we return. You can go and select disciples now. Yes, this disciple understands. Jin Yiming turned his head and said, Xiao Hua, follow me. Xiao Hua's mind raced. He was considering whether or not he should tell the golden core cultivator about the pearl. The golden core cultivator took the pearl and turned around, leaving behind a lonely scene. His figure gradually disappeared. All right, let's talk about it later. Xiao Hua muttered as he followed Jin Yiming back to the pavilion. Jin Yiming clapped his hands and took out a number plate and handed it over to Xiao Hua. Fellow Taoist Xiao, this is your number plate. Please keep it well and don't keep it in your storage bag. I look forward to your performance and hope that you can join my Imperial Thunder sect as soon as possible. Thank you for your kind words. Xiao Hua clasped his hands. Following Jin Yiming's hand seals, Xiao Hua returned to the Thunderous Peak. -6. Chapter 15:19. How can there be people in this world who don't have the 5 elements? It's just that the fire element is hidden. The figure of the gold core cultivator appeared in a small pavilion in the depths of the dense fog. There was a trace of a smile at the corner of his mouth. As he spoke, he waved his hand and took out a very simple bamboo flute from his sleeve. It did not have the slightest trace of magic power fluctuations. He placed it in front of his eyes and looked at it deeply. Then, he placed it by his lips and a melodious flute sound slowly rang out. When Xiao Hua returned to the Thunderclap Peak, it was already past noon. The sun above his head had already set slightly in the west. Fellow Xiao, seeing Xiao Hua's figure appear on the Thunderclap Peak, Shue's heart inexplicably relaxed. She immediately jumped up and raised her hand. Here. Xiao Hua saw Shui jump up and down on the spot. His eyes unconsciously narrowed, and he also licked his lips inexplicably. His feet didn't stop, and he walked towards Shue's direction. Fellow Xiao, did you pass the selection? Shui asked somewhat impatiently. Her eyes were also nervously looking at Xiao Hua. Hee hee. Since I went out, how can I return empty-handed? If I was eliminated, I would naturally go to the west side of the Thunderclap Peak. How can I appear here? Xiaohua said proudly. Seeing Xiaohua's proudness, Shui didn't feel annoyed. Instead, a trace of expectation appeared in her heart. It was as if Xiaohua was originally supposed to be like this. Shui curled her lips and said, Humph, just now you were almost there. If you weren't smart, you would have been sent away by the Thunderbolt. Who am I? That little bit of intelligence is just a casual thing. It's nothing, Xiaohua said with a smile. Moreover, this DUI Ling is just a little brat. How would he know I's methods? I can deal with him, but it's just a piece of cake. Xiaohua's words were very self-satisfied and frivolous. However, Shui loved Xiaohua's words. She narrowed her eyes and said charmingly, Really? Who was it just now? Trembling in fear. Who? Xiaohua shook his head left and right as if trying to find the person Shui was talking about. Haha, Shui giggled and covered her mouth. After a while, she asked, Who did Daoist Jin bring you to see? What did he say? Others? Xiaohua's heart jumped and he secretly said, What? Others are others, then what about you and me? However, he said, It's nothing much. I just want to see a senior in the Golden Core stage and destroyed another mirror spirit. Then, he let I pass. Then, you really have no attributes? Shui asked with her eyes wide open. Xiaohua smiled and said, I naturally don't belong to any of the 5 elements. Only whether or not it has any attributes. Hee hee, I can't say for now. Seeing Xiaohua's complacent appearance, Shui didn't believe him. But seeing that Xiaohua didn't say anything, Shui's heart became even more nervous. She said with disdain, If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. Who cares? Right at this moment, a loud and clear voice came from the mini balls again. Fellow Taoists, the second round of the disciple selection is about to begin. Fellow Taoists, please place the number plates you just received in front of your chests and follow the disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect to Thunder-Seeking Valley. Thunder-Seeking Valley? Xiaohua was slightly stunned. However, he saw that Shui's face was already slightly pale. What? Fellow Taoist Shui, is there some kind of trick to this Thunder-Seeking Valley? Xiaohua couldn't help but ask. Alas, of course. Shui saw that everyone had stood up. She slapped a flying talisman on her body and flew away with the disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect in front of her. She said in a low voice, According to the information I got from the Imperial Thunder sect, Thunder-Seeking Valley is a dangerous place in the Imperial Thunder sect. It's the place where the disciples of the Aura Refining Realm have to undergo trials when they reach the peak of the Aura Refining Realm. Reach the peak of the Aura Refining Realm? Xiaohua was shocked and shouted. Then, what kind of dangers are there? Shui shook her head blankly and said, That day, I only listened to it like a story. I didn't ask in detail. Stupid. You obviously want to participate in the disciple selection of the Imperial Thunder sect. Why didn't you ask more? Xiaohua criticized without the slightest hesitation. I only know that the Imperial Thunder sect's disciple selection has to pass 2 rounds. This round wasn't included. Shui said with some grievance. If I had known earlier, I would have asked earlier. If I had known earlier, you would be a Foundation Establishment senior now. Xiaohua retorted. Shui was very unhappy. Just as she was about to retort, she felt the entire Thunderclap Peak shake. From the top of the restriction on the Thunderclap Peak, several waves of magic power flashed like ripples. As the waves of magic power swept past, Shui and Xiaohua's number plates also flashed with 2 faint brilliance. The brilliance of the light actually blocked the magic power waves. The magic power waves very calmly swept past the 2 of them. With a rumbling sound, a thunderbolt struck from the top of the restriction. It hit a cultivator about a dozen feet away from Xiaohua. That cultivator was about the 9th level of Qi refining, but because he didn't wear a number plate, when the wave of magic power flashed past, it triggered the restriction. That thunderbolt was extremely fast and fierce. The 9th level cultivator didn't have any time to react before he was struck, and turned into charcoal in an instant. Huh, what's wrong? Does this cultivator not have a number plate? Shue Shue asked curiously. Or did he put his number plate in his storage bag? Hee. Is there even a need to say it? The 9th level of Qi refining is the high level of Qi refining. I'm afraid his physique doesn't meet the requirements of the Imperial Thunder Sect. That's why he took the risk to stay and see if there's a chance. Xiaohua had a look of sympathy on his face. Thinking back to himself just now, wasn't that exactly the case? While they were talking, a few Imperial Thunder Sect disciples flew over. They looked at the charcoal, cleaned up the mess, and flew away again. A 9th level Qi refining cultivator, gone just like that. Xiaohua and Shue Shue flew further and further away, occasionally turning back to sigh. The lightning-seeking valley was located within the Leimo mountain range. The towering mountain ranges on both sides were like 2 open doors. The entrance to the lightning-seeking valley was also square. From outside the valley, one could see the lush flowers within the valley. This place looks very beautiful. Could it be that there's a hidden danger? Xiaohua muttered in his heart as he looked at the seemingly ordinary thunder-seeking valley from afar. There were about 3,000 cultivators selected in the first round. Xiaohua and Shue Shue were flying at the very front. When they arrived at Thunder-Seeking Valley, the sun was already setting. The Imperial Thunder Sect disciples led everyone to the entrance of Thunder-Seeking Valley. They turned around and flew away. At the same time, a figure flashed out from the sky with a thunderbolt. Thunder evasion! Shue Shue exclaimed. That's thunder evasion? Xiaohua suddenly remembered what Qin Qinghua said when he met him in Shihuang Town. Your flying technique is very strange. It's even faster than the thunder escape of my Imperial Thunder Sect. Yes, that's the secret thunder evasion of the Imperial Thunder Sect. It's said to be the fastest evasion technique in the cultivation world. Shue Shue slightly nodded and said. Xiaohua's gaze fell on the figure that flashed out. The cultivator who used thunder evasion was actually at the middle stage of foundation establishment. He was about 40 years old. Greetings, senior. The cultivators were very tactful and bowed to pay their respects. The cultivator slightly nodded and released his divine sense to scan everyone. He waved his hand and said, Yes, not bad. You're all handsome cultivators from my country of Shi. Then he pointed at Thunder-Seeking Valley and said, Your second test is to pass Thunder-Seeking Valley. This old man is the host of the second test. As for my name, if you pass, you'll naturally know. If you don't pass, then even if I tell you, it's useless, so I won't say it. This, Xiaohua secretly laughed in his heart. Why is this foundation establishment senior so long-winded? As if he could understand Xiaohua's thoughts, the cultivator said again, This old man won't be long-winded with you. The second test is very simple. It's tomorrow morning. If you can smoothly pass Thunder-Seeking Valley, then you've passed the second test. This old man wants to remind you that Thunder-Seeking Valley is very dangerous. You must bring enough yellow talismans with you. It's just like when you're training in a dangerous place. You can't be careless otherwise. The cultivator said he wasn't long-winded, but he actually reminded a lot of things. It was like a senior warning a junior about to go out and train. Only when everyone was a little tired of it, the cultivator said, Finally, this old man wants to say that the second test has a risk to your life. If you want to withdraw, then you don't have to enter the valley. All right, everyone, if you're ready, then enter the valley. It wasn't easy to wait until the cultivator said these words. Several cultivators in front of Xiaohua couldn't bear it anymore. Their figures immediately flew up, and they rushed into Thunder-Seeking Valley. Although Xiaohua and Shue Shue weren't in a hurry, they also followed the crowd and slowly flew in. Sigh, if you don't listen to the advice of an old man, then you'll suffer. Seeing everyone fly into Thunder-Seeking Valley, the cultivator sighed slightly. These 3,000 people, I'm afraid, half of them will die inside. But why don't these cultivators believe this old man's words? Soon after, the cultivator's figure swayed, and a thunderbolt flashed again. The cultivator quickly flew forward, passing over the nearby mountain peak, and headed towards the end of Thunder-Seeking Valley. Xiaohua and Shue Shue flew closer to Thunder-Seeking Valley. Seeing everyone flying forward like a swarm of bees, Shue Shue also followed closely behind. Xiaohua said in a low voice. Fellow Taoist Shui, please wait a moment. Why? Although Shui slowed down, seeing everyone flying further and further away, she was somewhat puzzled. Many people make light work. Although this thunder-seeking valley is dangerous, with many people passing through, we can naturally overcome these difficulties. Why don't you follow the crowd? You know full well that Thunder-Seeking Valley is dangerous. It's the place where the high-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder sect train. Can the dangers inside be dealt with by many people? Xiaohua was unhurried. Moreover, the second stage's requirement is only to pass through Thunder-Seeking Valley in the wee hours of the morning. It's not like it depends on who gets there first. Wouldn't it be fine as long as we safely arrive before daybreak? Soon after, Xiaohua looked ahead and said with a smile, Of course, if fellow Taoist Shui doesn't agree, then you can fly away with him first. -6. Chapter 15:20. Looking at the crowd not far away, Shui hesitated for a moment and sighed. Forget it, I'll listen to you this time. However, fellow Taoist Shui has to be responsible for I. What? Xiaohua was stunned and thought to himself, these words, don't they have some other meaning? These words were very ambiguous. After Shui finished speaking, she immediately came to her senses and said hesitantly, if there's danger, those cultivators will only care about their own safety. Who would care about I? It's better to obediently walk at the back. Since fellow Taoist Shui understands, that's good. Xiaohua nodded and then looked to the left. The two of them weren't the only smart ones. About 10 meters away from them, there were also dozens of cultivators who were either crossing their arms, standing with their hands behind their backs, or floating in the air. They were all coldly looking at the people flying in front of them. Fellow Taoist Xiao, what should we do? Shui also looked and asked in a low voice. Act according to the circumstances. Xiaohua smiled mysteriously. Act according to the circumstances? Isn't that the same as not saying anything? Shui pursed her lips and clapped her hands. She took out some yellow talismans from her storage pouch and handed them to Xiaohua. If you don't want to say it, then don't say it. You're acting like you're very profound. But, as soon as these words left her mouth, Shui felt some regret. It seemed she still hadn't figured it out. Xiaohua was now a late-stage 10th-layer qi refining cultivator, not the low-level 4th-layer qi refining cultivator she saw before. How could she be so impudent? Fortunately, Xiaohua didn't care and also didn't notice Shui's gaze. He looked at the yellow talismans handed over and took out 2, saying, Flight talismans? I don't need them. You can use them yourself. Shui opened her cherry lips slightly and her mind spun rapidly. If he doesn't need the flight talisman, doesn't that mean he knows the flight technique? The flight technique? How could a 10th-layer qi refining cultivator know it? Even a 12th-layer qi refining disciple from a cultivation sect might not be able to grasp it, right? Xiaohua, a loose cultivator actually has this kind of divine ability? Unexpectedly, just as Shui was thinking this, Xiaohua took out several yellow talismans from his storage pouch again and said with a smile, I don't have many yellow talismans, but I have a lot of flying talismans. It's precisely for escaping. Shui didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but there was a trace of disappointment in her heart. It seems like Xiaohua should be able to fly. All right, fellow Taoist Shui, the cultivators in front of us have already disappeared. The ones behind us are still wasting their time. We'll take our leave first. Let's see what dangers this seeking Thunder Valley has. Xiaohua waved his hand and used a flying talisman on himself. Shui also calmed herself down and nodded. I will listen to fellow Taoist Xiao's instructions. As he spoke, he followed behind Xiaohua. The scenery of Seeking Thunder Valley was beautiful. Countless fresh flowers and green grass covered the ground. Countless oddly shaped trees grew diagonally on both sides of the valley. Occasionally, there were even a few small streams flowing out from the caves of the valley. They flowed along the slopes of the valley. One could only hear the gurgling sound of the water, but one couldn't see the end of the stream. At this time, it was already dusk. Seeking Thunder Valley was located in an east-west direction. In the western horizon, countless clouds were like shredded cotton, covering the entire sky. The dim sunset was blocked by a thick layer of clouds. From time to time, a dark red light would seep through the gaps between the clouds, but before it could illuminate the valley, it was already diffused by the darkness of the night. It's a bit strange. Xiao Hua paid attention to the surrounding scenery, but apart from being beautiful, he didn't see any danger. He couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Shui, are you sure this is the trial grounds of the Imperial Thunder Sect's high-level disciples?" "Fellow Taoist Shui?" Xiao Hua asked a few questions. Seeing that no one answered, he couldn't help but turn his head and ask again. "Ah?" When Xiao Hua turned his head and saw that there was no one behind him, he couldn't help but get goosebumps. Just now, wasn't she still following behind me? How come she disappeared without a word? Xiao Hua took a deep breath, calmed himself down and looked around. However, there was only the sound of the wind behind him, and only the scenery that he had just walked over. Where could he see half of Shui's figure? "Fellow Taoist Shui? Fellow Taoist Shui?" Xiao Hua raised his voice and shouted a few more times. Moreover, he turned around and flew back. The valley was still as quiet as before. There was no one in sight, nor was there. Not good. Xiao Hua suddenly realized that the scene he saw when he was flying back was exactly the same as the scene he saw when he was flying forward. Not good. It can't be an illusion formation, right? Xiao Hua immediately thought of what he encountered on Thousandjiang Peak. Sure enough, when Xiao Hua turned around and flew forward again, the scenery around him was the same as the scenery he saw when he turned around. When Xiao Hua raised his head to look at the west, the sun had already set, and the hazy stars gradually began to appear. I'm afraid, Xiao Hua thought. When he turned his head to look at the other side of the valley, it was absolutely strange. The stars in the valley also had the same appearance, but they revealed a dim starlight. Humph, Xiao Hua sneered. He stood up, urged his magic power, and used the flight technique. His entire body was like a meteor, flying towards a section of the valley at extreme speed. According to Xiao Hua's thoughts, when he was at the second level of qi refining, he could rely on his flying speed to break through Yulian Mountain's bewildering fog beast. This Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation should also be able to be broken through with the flight technique, right? Unfortunately, Xiao Hua flew extremely fast. When he saw that the surrounding scenery was somewhat blurry, and it seemed like it was about to be torn apart by Xiao Hua, the space around Xiao Hua suddenly moved. For some reason, the surrounding scenery became clear again, as if Xiao Hua simply didn't fly away. Good heavens! This Seeking Thunder Valley's illusion formation is really powerful. It's worthy of being a place where peak qi refining cultivators train. Seeing this, Xiao Hua stopped. He frowned and thought to himself, there's no need to say anything. Shui is probably the same as me. Oh, all the cultivators must have fallen into this illusion formation. But how do I break this illusion formation? Xiao Hua's figure floated in midair. His hands crossed in front of his chest, and he frowned as he thought, illusion formation. Illusion formation. How could I forget? Don't I still have my perception? Xiao Hua suddenly thought, and immediately released his perception. Sure enough, in Xiao Hua's perception, although he couldn't see any restrictions, he could still feel the outline of Seeking Thunder Valley. Therefore, Xiao Hua slowed down his flying speed and slowly advanced in the direction of Seeking Thunder Valley. However, when he flew a few feet in a straight line, he encountered another restriction. In his perception, every time he flew half a foot forward, his body would abruptly return to its original spot. It seemed like this was some kind of spatial restriction technique. Oh, so that's how it is. Xiao Hua landed on the ground and took a step forward. From what the naked eye could see, he took this step firmly. However, from what the naked eye could sense, this step only swayed in the air for a moment before landing on the ground again. I found the location of the formation, but how do I break the restriction? Xiao Hua only practiced the art of making talismans and alchemy. This art of formations, he still didn't have the opportunity to come into contact with it. Xiao Hua stood on the ground, frowning. He released his perception and used his hand to touch his nose as he walked back and forth. After walking for a while, Xiaohua discovered that this space was only about 100 zhang wide. Moreover, this restriction also had the effect of isolating divine sense. Even if Xiaohua's perception was, it was blocked and couldn't pass through. Huh, that's strange. If this is an illusion formation, then shouldn't Xue be at the same distance as me? But why isn't there anything around me, but I don't know if there's anything behind me? Xiaohua was somewhat puzzled. Besides, where are the thousands of people in front of me? How? Haha, Xiaohua suddenly laughed and walked back to the location of the restriction with large strides. He released his perception and used his feet to continuously walk back there. 1 step, 2 steps. Each step brought him back to its original position. Huh, could it be that I'm wrong? Xiaohua scratched his head, but just as he was hesitating in his perception, he actually took a step forward. Ha ha ha, didn't I say so? This restriction definitely works sometimes, or else Xue and I would definitely be together. Xiaohua laughed loudly and released his perception. Sure enough, within this 100 zhang, Xue was like a headless fly, flying everywhere, and her face was abnormally panicked. Xiaohua flew up to Xue's side and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Xue." "Ah? Fellow Taoist Xiao, where did you come from?" Xue cried out in pleasant surprise. But when her gaze searched for the origin of Xiaohua's voice, there was actually a blank space. Huh, what's going on? Xiaohua withdrew his perception. Sure enough, where he looked, Xue's figure also disappeared. Damn, this illusion formation is really powerful. It can actually meet but can't see. Xiaohua cursed in his heart and released his perception again. He thought for a moment and said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Xue, don't panic, I will go over and pull you." Okay, Xue responded, but there was an indescribable feeling in her heart. However, when she felt 2 fingers tugging at her sleeve, there was a trace of disappointment for no reason. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, can you see me?" I can vaguely see a bit." Xiaohua said vaguely, "This is an illusion formation, follow I?" Okay, Xue responded and followed Xiaohua's pull, slowly moving forward. Rumble right at this moment, a burst of fireball talismans exploded behind Xue, shaking the surrounding valleys to the point of shaking. It was reckoned that Xiaohua and the other cultivators behind him had also fallen into the illusion formation. "Fellow Taoist Xiao, quickly leave." This illusion formation can be forcefully broken with magic power, but if it can't be broken, its counterattack power will be even stronger. This kind of Seeking Thunder Valley is a place of trial for high-level disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. It's not something we can break by force. We can't let other people ruin our good fortune. Damn it, we just entered the valley. With such a powerful illusion formation, how can people survive? Xiaohua couldn't help but curse. Hearing Xiaohua's words, Xue's heart stirred, and she said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xiao in front. Do you see other cultivators?" "Seems like there aren't any." Xiaohua seemed to have thought of something as well. "If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. -6. Chapter 1521. I'm afraid I was harmed by you." Xue's expression was indescribable. Her pair of beautiful eyes stared at Xiaohua as if she was blaming him, and also acting coquettishly. But could she see Xiaohua? Xiaohua didn't think so much, but his face was still embarrassed. He smiled apologetically and said, I was too cautious. I didn't expect that this thunder-seeking valley was used by Imperial Thunder Sect's peak aura refining disciples. Most of us cultivators are in the middle stage or early stage. How can we compare to Imperial Thunder Sect's late stage aura refining disciples? If this thunder-seeking valley's restrictions were all opened, I'm afraid there wouldn't be many who could pass through, right? Therefore, some of the restrictions in this thunder-seeking valley are open and some are closed. This illusion formation was probably closed when the cultivators passed through. Xue added. At this time, she didn't have the slightest intention of blaming him. That's right. Xiaohua nodded slightly. At this time, the two of them had already walked to the front of the restriction. Xiaohua smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Xue, Please wait a moment. After a while, when the restriction in the space stopped, Xiao Hua pulled Xue Xue's sleeve and walked forward again. Why did you stop for a while? The two of them walked silently for a while. Xue Xue looked at Xiao Hua and asked in a low voice. Oh, nothing. I just found that illusion formation, Xiao Hua said casually. But when he spoke, he suddenly realized that he could see Xue Xue's face. That pair of joyful and worried eyes were staring straight at him. Oh! Xiao Hua immediately withdrew his hand and shouted, Fellow Taoist Xue, you can see I? Seeing Xiao Hua's somewhat nervous appearance, Xue Xue laughed and said, I could see fellow Taoist after we stopped for a while. It's just that fellow Taoist was busy rushing, so I didn't mention it. Ha ha, ha ha. Xiao Hua rubbed his hands and pointed. Then we'll just keep going forward. Go forward? Xue Xue said curiously. That's obviously a stream. Fellow Taoist Xiao. Xiao Hua patted his forehead and said with a smile, Fellow Taoist Xue, just listen to I. If we don't move forward, I'm afraid we'll still be flying around like before. You're the one who's flying everywhere. Xue Xue seemed to have also heard the word fly in Xiao Hua's words and rebuked him, raising her hand and saying, What? Xiao Hua was a little stunned as he looked at Xue Xue's snow-white wrist. Nonsense, you have to pull me. Otherwise, I know where to go. Xue Xue laughed. Xiao Hua's eyes flickered. His left hand hesitated by Xue Xue's wrist for a moment, but he still reached back and grabbed Xue Xue's Taoist robe. The two of them walked for a long time, stopping and walking like this, not saying anything else. Xue Xue only followed Xiao Hua. Even if it was a stream, even if it was a mountain wall, she didn't avoid it at all. She opened her eyes wide and only cared about walking. From the looks of it, she was extremely reassured by Xiao Hua. The night breeze gently blew, and the starlight became even more brilliant. The atmosphere between the two people was somewhat strange. It seemed to be a kind of tranquility, and also seemed to be a kind of tacit understanding. In short, Xue Xue didn't ask Xiao Hua why he could see through this illusion array, and also didn't ask how he passed through this seeking thunder valley. We're here. Hearing Xiao Hua's words and feeling Xiao Hua's hand let go of her, Xue Xue felt a burst of disappointment in her heart for no reason, as if she really hoped that the illusion array of this seeking thunder valley was as long as possible. What's wrong with me? Xue Xue's face was slightly red, and she couldn't help but ask herself in her heart. However, before her thoughts turned, Xiao Hua asked with concern, Fellow Taoist Xue, what's wrong with you? Did I make a mistake? Could it be? Oh, no, nothing. Xue Xue hurriedly covered it up. She raised her eyes and looked at the somewhat spacious area in front of her. There weren't any flowers or plants in the valley. I'm just very curious. This place is very different from what I saw just now. Why are there all bare stone walls? I don't know. If we're still in the illusion array. Following Xue Xue's gaze, Xiao Hua said with a smile, If fellow Taoist Xue sees bare stone walls, then you're right. This place has already left the illusion array. Xue Xue felt a burst of regret for no reason in her heart. Why didn't I say that the flowers and plants are still lush? Soon after, the two of them flew up one after the other. However, just after flying for several tens of feet and turning a few corners, Xiao Hua suddenly stopped. Xue Xue was somewhat absent-minded and almost bumped into Xiao Hua's back. The strong aura on Xiao Hua's body caused Xue Xue to feel a burst of impatience, and her eyes flickered incessantly. Fellow Taoist Xue, Xiao Hua asked again with concern. Was it? Just now in the illusion array. Xiao Hua obviously discovered Xue Xue's abnormality. No. Xue Xue's figure took a deep breath, and the slightly clear cold wind made Xue Xue slowly sober up. Xiao Hua was a bit worried and warned. Fellow Taoist Xue, I don't have any heart-clearing yellow talismans here. If you have any in your storage bag, it's best to use one. An illusion array? Maybe there's some hidden restriction within it. Seeing Xiao Hua so concerned, Xue Xue felt sweet in her heart and smiled. I'll do as you say. As he spoke, he slapped his hand and took out a rarely seen soul-cleansing talisman from his storage bag. He urged his magic power, and the soul-cleansing talisman turned into a sparkling stream of water that poured down on Xue Xue's head. With a schwa sound, Xue Xue seemed to have suddenly woken up. Her mind was clear, and those beautiful thoughts in her heart just now all disappeared. I'm ashamed, Shwe Shwe secretly shouted in her heart. Needless to say, everything just now was caused by the illusion array. Was there even a need to say it? The illusion array of Seeking Thunder Valley was used to test Imperial Thunder Sect's 11th level Chi refinement disciples. How could it be just a mere maze? More importantly, it was the erosion of the mind. Just now, Shwe Shwe was running around randomly in the illusion array, and her mind was lost. She had long been confused by the illusion array, and an inner demon was born. In addition, she relied on Xiao Hua, so of course her feelings were secretly born. If it wasn't for Xiao Hua's timely reminder, this inner demon would have become even stronger, and in the end affect her cultivation. Many thanks, fellow Taoist Xiao. The trace of confusion in Shwe Shwe's eyes disappeared, and with some lingering fear, she cupped her hands and smiled. If it wasn't for fellow Taoist Zhao's reminder, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Hee, there's no other reason. We're just mutually supporting each other, that's all. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and then pointed ahead and said, I'm afraid that ahead is the true place to test the new disciples. Oh, is that so? Shwe Shwe's face turned cold, and looked in the direction Xiao Hua pointed. She saw that in front of the bend, there were scattered some rags, some worn-out talisman papers, and even a small storage pouch. Let's carefully go over and take a look. Xiao Hua extended his right hand's finger and slightly pointed. Seeing Xiao Hua's finger move slightly, Shwe Shwe's heart also slightly jumped, and then she was greatly shocked. Could it be the effect of the illusion array? Still hasn't been removed? However, the feeling of her heartbeat was so enjoyable that Shwe Shwe couldn't help but stare at Xiao Hua's thin and tall back. That back seemed lonely, but in the loneliness, there was a kind of indomitable feeling. Alas, the feelings and inner demons of this world, who can clearly say which is real and which is fake. I'm afraid that when the fake is real, the real is fake, and when the real is fake, the fake is real. Fellow Taoist Shwe, look. Xiao Hua very carefully flew to the corner. Looking ahead, he saw that the valley, which was about 100 meters long, was perfectly straight. However, this perfectly straight valley was in a complete mess. Yes, at this time, Shwe Shwe also restrained her emotions and flew to Xiao Hua's side. After looking, she nodded and said, This should be the Imperial Thunder Sect's test. This is an offensive formation. If you can resist it, then you can enter the next section. Otherwise, yes, since there aren't any corpses, presumably the Imperial Thunder Sect also left a way out. That number plate should have a protective function. What that senior said just now should be to guard against us. Yes, fellow Taoist Xiao, we have the number plates on our bodies. If we activate the protection of the number plates, we should be teleported out of this thunder-seeking valley, and thus lose the qualifications to be selected. Shwe Shwe's face was also solemn. Looking at the debris left in this valley, she knew that this offensive formation must be incomparably powerful. Xiao Hua clapped his hands, took out several yellow talismans, and placed them on his body one by one. Shwe Shwe also did the same. AI, if only I had some kind of protective magic tool. Xiao Hua's heart was moved as he thought to himself. Unfortunately, there were many things in Xiao Hua's space, and there were also a few magic tools. For example, the Spirit Husbandry Sect's Triangle, Yin Wei's Ring, Ling Jingyi's Shadow Moon, and Xiao Nan's Cheng family's soul-absorbing bell. Unfortunately, these things all needed to be refined using the secret techniques of their respective sections. Xiao Hua didn't have the technique to refine them, so he couldn't refine them. The only magic tool he could refine was Ling Jingyi's Shadow Moon, but Xiao Hua had some misgivings about it, so he naturally couldn't refine it. Therefore, Xiao Hua still lacked a suitable magic tool. What about the others? They were all things he took from low and middle-level Qi refinement cultivators, so it was impossible for there to be any magic tools. As for the storage bag he got from the talisman puppet, other than some yellow talismans and spirit stones from the Fu family, there was nothing else. Let's see how it goes. If it doesn't work, I can only fly a bit faster. Xiao Hua made up his mind, turned his head and said, Fellow Taoist Shwe, stay closer to me. If it really doesn't work, I will fly a bit faster and see if I can pull you and escape. Okay. Shue Shue nodded. She stretched out her hand, took out several yellow talismans, and flew to Xiao Hua's side. Let's go, Xiao Hua ordered, and the two of them flew inside at the same time. Woo! When Xiao Hua and Shue Shue just passed the corner, a gust of wind blew, and the sky above lightning-seeking valley was instantly filled with many dark clouds. Kacha, immediately, several hair-thin lightning bolts struck down. Are you kidding me? It's actually heavenly lightning? Xiao Hua and Shue Shue were dumbstruck. This kind of lightning, which Qi Refinement Cultivator could dodge it. Fortunately, the lightning bolts didn't directly strike Xiao Hua and Shue Shue. Instead, they struck the stone walls on both sides. Zalala, the heavenly lightning struck down, and countless tiny lightning bolts appeared on the stone walls. A purple brilliance gradually emerged from the stone walls, forming a net. Then, it flew out from the stone walls in all directions, covering Xiao Hua and Shue Shue. Damn it! Seeing this, Xiao Hua couldn't help but curse. The entire valley is covered with this kind of forbidden technique. No matter how fast I fly, it's impossible for me to fly out in an instant. Those thousands of people, alas, aren't they suitable for this kind of forbidden technique? Thinking quickly, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and dozens of top-quality fireball talismans were taken out by him. He urged his magic power and threw them towards the sky above his head. Shue Shue was the same. Several yellow talismans flew out, and a fire net flew into the sky. -6. Chapter 1522. Rumble. A series of loud noises rang out. The fireball talismans that Xiao Hua threw out were extremely powerful, blasting away the lightning bolts that were falling down from above, creating a large gap. When Shue Shue's fire net talisman flew into the air, the brilliance and power of the fire net talisman was far inferior to Xiao Hua's fireball talisman. Top-grade fireball talisman? Shue Shue was so shocked that she covered her mouth. She was very clear on how much spirit stones this thing was worth. She had never seen someone throw out so many without any heartache. Of course, you get what you pay for. Seeing that the lightning restriction was broken by Xiao Hua, Shue Shue was also delighted after her shock. Damn! Just as a smile appeared on Shue Shue's face, an extremely large amount of spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to gather at the spot where the lightning had already dissipated in the air, setting off gusts of wind. One could see with the naked eye that in the gap created by the fireball talisman, flashes of lightning gradually appeared once again. Another complete lightning net quickly gathered together, and without any change in its trajectory, it spread towards the entire lightning-seeking valley. Moreover, this time, the lightning net was much closer to Xiao Hua. Damn it! How did the cultivators in front pass through? Xiao Hua cursed in a low voice. With a wave of his hand, he immediately threw out a dozen fireball talismans. Rumble. A loud sound rang out, and another large gap was created. Go! Xiao Hua shouted and pulled his hand, grabbing Shue Shue's sleeve. The two of them quickly flew towards the gap in the air, and before the lightning net could recover, they flew to the top of the lightning net. Hurry up and fly over there. Xiao Hua pointed forward. Shue Shue understood and urged her magic power to fly forward at high speed. Before they could fly more than 30 meters, a few more lightning bolts struck the stone wall. Another wave of lightning net formed above Xiao Hua and Shue Shue's heads, and once again scattered down. Xiao Hua had no choice but to fly down a bit and throw out fireball talismans again. Fellow Taoist Xiao quickly looked below. Shue Shue was very alarmed, and she lowered her head and shouted, "Are you kidding me?" Xiao Hua slightly lowered his head, and immediately saw that the lightning net that fell on the ground just now was once again covering the ground, and it was not far from their feet. Without hesitation, Xiao Hua threw out a bunch of fireball talismans again. After dodging 2 lightning nets, Xiao Hua was just about to breathe a sigh of relief. Who would have thought that the 3rd lightning net would fall after it struck the stone wall? It's not over. Xiao Hua was greatly shocked. If this continues, wouldn't this lightning net be endless? AI, why didn't I think of flying up? Xiao Hua looked at the 2 gaps created by the explosion. He waved his hand and pulled Shue Shue's Taoist robe upwards. How Shue Shue did not expect Shue Shue would suddenly. Xiaohua's figure did not catch up. In a hurry, the Taoist robe in Xiaohua's hands was about to slip. Xiaohua's movements were also fast, and he grabbed Xue Xue's wrist. At this time, Xue Xue was also shocked, and she also reached out to grab Xiaohua's wrist. In an instant, the two of them grabbed each other's wrist at the same time. Xue Xue and Xiaohua were both shocked, and they wanted to let go at the same time. However, just as they let go, they felt that the other party wanted to let go. Their hands tightened again, and they grabbed each other's wrists again. Forget it. Xiaohua did not have time to say anything. He let Xue Xue grab his wrist, and he also grabbed Xue Xue's wrist, and suddenly flew towards the top of Thunder-Seeking Valley. Xiaohua's flying technique was extremely fast. In just a breath's time, he had already rushed out of the lightning net and reached the top of the valley. Hee, if I had known this would happen, I would have. Xiaohua's heart flashed with a trace of hope. Suddenly, a few strands of lightning as thick as hair flashed from the low clouds. These lightning bolts didn't strike the stone walls of the Thunder-Seeking Valley, but directly fell towards Xiaohua. Ouch! Xue Xue could not help but cry out in alarm, and she grabbed Xiaohua's wrist even closer. Damn it! Xiaohua immediately waved his hand, and a pile of fireball talismans appeared again, exploding a gap under their feet, and the two of them fell into the lightning net again. Those lightning bolts fell on the lightning net, and in an instant, the gap created by Xiaohua's explosion was filled. What should we do? Xiaohua stopped in midair and looked at the distance of Thunder-Seeking Valley, and then looked at Xue Xue. Xue Xue's face was red, and she quickly wanted to let go of his hand. However, Xiaohua did not let go, and said in a low voice, "Fellow Taoist Xue, if you trust one, then close your eyes. Don't use any magic power, and I will bring you out of here." Okay, I will listen to fellow Taoist Zhao's instructions. Xue Xue's heart felt warm, and her heart was calm. She closed her eyes, and the hand that had just let go grabbed Xiaohua's wrist again. Rumble. There was a loud sound, and then Xue Xue felt like she was a kite, flying up and down. The speed of flying up and down was extremely fast, and a burst of violent wind sounded in her ears. The wind was biting cold, and it blew Xue Xue painfully. She originally wanted to use her magic power to protect herself, but when she thought of Xiaohua's warning, she did not dare to use the defensive yellow talisman. Fortunately, this time was not long. Without waiting for Xue Xue to count to 10 in her heart, Xiaohua's figure stopped. However, after a while, Xiaohua still did not let Xue Xue open her eyes. "Xiaohua, can I open my eyes?" Xue Xue could not help but ask. "Oh, of course you can." Xiaohua's voice sounded, and then Xiaohua's hand slowly loosened. Ouch! Is he doing it on purpose? Xue Xue's heart suddenly panicked, and she forgot to open her eyes. "Fellow Taoist Xue, use the flying talisman. There is no problem here." Xiaohua's tone did not have any joy. Okay. Xue Xue activated her magic power, and at the same time opened her eyes. She did not know if it was intentional or not, but her hand did not let go of Xiaohua's wrist. Ah? When Xue Xue opened her eyes and saw the scene in front of her, Xue Xue could not help but cry out in alarm. About 10 feet away from the two of them, there was a lightning net flashing with a faint purple brilliance, blocking the entire passage of Thunder-Seeking Valley from top to bottom. There was simply no gap for them to fly through. "Fellow Taoist Xue, let go of your hand first." Xiaohua's expression was somewhat gloomy, and he said in a low voice. Yes, Xue Xue's voice was like a mosquito's buzzing. She let go of his hand, but at the same time, she could not help but look back. Not far away, there was also an extremely large amount of rolling lightning net that had not completely disappeared, and its power was still not reduced, sealing off Thunder-Seeking Valley. Alas, if it was not for Xiaohua, this trial, I'm afraid it would be impossible for me to pass. Such a long distance, I don't know how did he fly so fast? It seems like he flew faster than Uncle? Xue Xue rejoiced, and also thought of those cultivators behind them just now. She did not know what method those people used to pass through here. "Fellow Taoist Xue, this lightning net is from top to bottom. If we directly fly over it, I'm afraid the lightning within the clouds will strike down again." Xiaohua frowned and said, "And this lightning, may not necessarily take our lives, but if we are hit, the thunder-controlling sect's number plate will definitely be activated, and our qualifications will also inevitably be lost. Fellow Taoist, do you have any methods? Hee, Xiaohua. Only now did you think to ask me? Shue's face revealed a smile, and she clapped her hand. An embroidered ball-like magic artifact appeared. On the round embroidered ball, there were extremely many openings, and all around the openings were fine runes that faintly flickered with magic power. This is... Xiaohua's brows relaxed, and he asked in a low voice. This is naturally my Misty Mountain's ancestral magic artifact, Jade Glyph. Shue said proudly. Ah, Jade Talisman? Xiaohua was greatly shocked, and he looked at the Jade Glyph very eagerly. Of course not. Shue said sweetly. This is only a magic artifact, not a Jade Talisman, but magic artifacts need divine sense. You're only at the 7th level of Qi refining. How can you control it? Xiaohua asked even though he already knew the answer. Hee, Xiaohua, are you really a loose cultivator? Haven't you heard that the ancestral magic artifacts of cultivation aristocratic families all have a kind of secret method to control them? Shue didn't conceal anything, and she took out an old yellow talisman from her storage pouch, waving it as she said, "This yellow talisman was made by our ancestors. Only my Misty Mountain's bloodline can use it." But Xiaohua's eyes turned, and he hesitated to speak. What's wrong? Shue stopped using magic power and asked curiously. No, nothing. I just want to ask, if I don't have Misty Mountain's bloodline, can this Jade Glyph not be controlled? Xiaohua waved his hand. He actually wanted to ask, Shue has Misty Mountain's bloodline, but she's a woman after all. Then, can her descendants also be controlled? This kind of question naturally wasn't good to ask directly, so he changed the topic. This yellow talisman was prepared for us Qi refining cultivators. If you have my Misty Mountain's sacrificial refining technique, you can naturally control it. Shue didn't suspect anything, and she used her magic power to place the yellow talisman on her body. Soon after, she cast an obscure spell, and from the center of the Jade Glyph, a white mist gradually diffused out. Looking at the increasing amount of mist, Shue continued to say, or you can use a common sacrificial refining spell to refine these magic artifacts. Although those spells can't completely release the magic artifact's power, it's still much better than not being able to use them. Huh. Then fellow Taoist Shue, do you have such a common sacrificial refining spell? Xiaohua was delighted, and he quickly asked. Shue smiled bitterly. My Misty Mountain is a cultivation aristocratic family. How could we have such a spell? If fellow Taoist enters the Imperial Thunder sect, you can see if they have such a spell. Oh, so it's like that. Xiaohua nodded. Not long after, enough white mist flew out from the Jade Glyph, and Shue once again used her magic power to hold the Jade Glyph in her hand. The Jade Glyph flashed with a few faint rays of light, and the white mist scattered in the air and surrounded Xiaohua and Shue, just like a large ball of white cotton. Will this work? Xiaohua was somewhat doubtful. Hee, fellow Taoist Xiao, don't worry. Since there were cultivators who passed before, they must have also used their ancestral magic artifacts. I don't believe that a 10th layer Qi refining cultivator like you can't do anything, so they can pass without using magic artifacts. Shue was full of confidence. -6. Chapter 1523. All right. Seeing the confidence on Shue's face, Xiaohua could only nod. Of course, Xiaohua. Let's use some yellow talismans like the Vajra talisman. Shue clapped her hands and took out some defensive yellow talismans for Xiaohua. If the white mist can't block the lightning net, what's the use of the Vajra talisman? Xiaohua curled his lips in his heart, but he still took the yellow talisman and used his magic power to place it on his body. Xiaohua, be careful and follow closely. Don't leave the white mist. Shue warned again and again, and then used her magic power to activate the jade engraving to control the white mist. The two of them flew into the lightning net at the same time. Xiaohua didn't dare to release his perception completely, but he still wanted to see the effects of the jade engraving. so he only released a little of his perception and paid attention to the changes in the white mist outside the jade engraving. As expected, the jade engraving was effective. When Xiaohua and Shui flew in front of the lightning net before they entered, a part of the white mist had already merged into the lightning net. Zalala. After the lightning struck the white mist flashed with a faint purple brilliance and blocked the lightning outside. Great. Xiaohua almost clapped his hands and thought, if I can refine a magic artifact, that spirit husbandry sect's triangle can also release a ring. I reckon it can also pass through this lightning net. Shui saw that the white mist was effective and said with a smile, Xiaohua, be careful. We're going in now. Okay, I know, Xiaohua said with a smile. As they spoke, Shui controlled the white mist, and the two of them entered the lightning net. Once the white mist entered the lightning net, it was like a drop of water falling into a pot of boiling oil. Around the white mist, sizzling sounds could be heard, and at the edge of the white mist, purple brilliance kept flickering. Of course, all the lightning was blocked outside the white mist, and Xiaohua and Shui were unharmed. Hee, how is it? Shui turned her face and said to Xiaohua as if showing off her favorite toy. Is there anything else? It's great, Xiaohua said with a smile. Shui was excited and said with a smile, Uncle wanted me to take it, but I wasn't willing. Now that I think about it, it's a loss. Xiaohua smiled without saying anything. Then, the two of them flew slowly as if they were taking a stroll. However, after the time it took to brew a cup of tea, Shui's expression turned ugly. What's wrong? Xiaohua was very sensitive. Xiaohua, I was too arrogant. Shui's face gradually turned pale. I didn't expect this lightning net to be so long. My magic power. I'm afraid I won't be able to last much longer. Xiaohua was shocked and asked anxiously, how long can it last? At this moment, Shui tightly clenched her teeth and didn't speak anymore. Needless to say, she was trying her best to activate her Fali. Can you use my mana? Xiaohua was very anxious. He stretched out his hand and grabbed Shui's wrist. His magic power rushed over like a flood. It would have been fine if Xiaohua's magic power didn't enter, but as soon as his magic power entered, it immediately disturbed Shui's magic power. Shui's true qi in her meridians was already exhausted. No matter how she mobilized Xiaohua's magic power, if the two of them knew some kind of joint attack technique, then Xiaohua would have been able to control the jade carving at the very beginning. Now that he channeled his magic power, not to mention that the two of them didn't know any joint attack technique, they couldn't fuse two different kinds of magic power together. Even if the two of them could fuse their magic power, at this moment, Shui simply couldn't mobilize Xiaohua's magic power. That magic power in Shui's body could only damage Shui's cultivation. With a pu sound, Shui couldn't help but open her mouth and spit out a mouthful of blood. Immediately, the jade carving flashed wildly, and the white mist was sucked into the jade carving like a swarm of bees. With a zilala sound, the iron cloak talismans, diamond talismans, soft water talismans, and other talismans on Xiaohua and Shui's bodies were all destroyed by the lightning net. The yellow talismans used by qi refining cultivators were simply yellow paper under this lightning. They simply didn't have any decent resistance. With only a faint flash of brilliance, they were destroyed. Damn it! Xiaohua was greatly alarmed. Almost without thinking, he waved his hand, wanting to take out some yellow talismans from the space. But just as he took out a few fire net talismans, he suddenly thought of the bead in the space. At this moment, the bead was still flickering with lightning. It attracted a lot of clouds in the space, and there were also lightning echoing in the clouds. Many areas in the space were covered with lightning. This is it. Thinking back to the day when he took this bead out of the space, Xiaohua was delighted. Without hesitation, he took out the bead. Sure enough, as Xiaohua expected, as soon as the bead was taken out of the space, the originally dense dark clouds in the sky above Thunder-Seeking Valley became even more turbulent. An extremely large amount of lightning was born in an instant. Around Xiaohua and Shui, the lightning that was originally going to hit them suddenly changed directions. Like swallows returning to their nest, they all hit the bead in Xiaohua's hand. Not only that, But the lightning net of unknown length near Xiaohua was also attracted by the bead. In the blink of an eye, it was completely sucked in, revealing an empty valley. Xiaohua was pleasantly surprised. But looking at the lightning that was brewing above his head, the power of the lightning seemed to be much greater than the lightning net from before. Xiaohua patted his hand and put the bead back into his storage pouch. The bead disappeared, and the lightning in the clouds should have disappeared as well. However, at this moment, on the mountain walls around Thunder-Seeking Valley, there was a flash of brilliance. Countless talisman characters gradually appeared and immediately attracted the lightning in the clouds. Let's go. Xiaohua naturally understood that this was the sign of the lightning net appearing again. With a pull of his hand, he grabbed Xue Xue's wrist and flew forward. Zilala, Xiaohua, and Xue Xue had just turned the corner of Seeking Thunder Valley when a series of noises came from behind them. Xiaohua snuck a glance and saw that the lightning net had formed again just a few feet away from him. Damn it! Xiaohua spat and said in a low voice, "Isn't this thunder-controlling sect's trial too much?" "Xiaohua, you can't say that," Xue Xue said in a weak voice. "The thunder-controlling sect's disciples are all handsome in the cultivation world. If they don't do this in their own trial, they will lose face for the thunder-controlling sect when they leave the sect. Life is a small matter, but reputation is a big matter." Looking at Xue Xue's deathly pale face, Xiaohua sighed in his heart and let go of his hand. He patted his hand and took out a parasol dragon pill that he refined and handed it over. He said with a smile, "Xue Xue, I don't have any good medicinal pills here. This is a parasol dragon pill. Take one." And Xue Xue was very clear on what a parasol dragon pill was. It definitely wouldn't be effective for her Meridian's injuries. But on the other hand, this parasol dragon pill was given by Xiaohua. A trace of sweetness emerged in Xue Xue's heart. How could she refuse? Taking the parasol dragon pill, Xue Xue glanced ahead and pointed with her finger. "Xiaohua, let's go forward a bit more. It's better to be a bit further away from this forbidden spell. And I'll listen to you." Xiaohua nodded. However, after they walked a few dozen feet and turned a corner, they couldn't help but be dumbstruck. What do you think? As it turned out, in front of this corner was a large open space. 1,000 or so cultivators who seemed to be in a difficult situation were all sitting cross-legged. Every one of them had their eyes closed and were adjusting their breathing. Ha ha ha. Seeing this, Xiaohua almost laughed until he fainted. He secretly said, "I knew it. It was difficult for Xue Xue and I to pass through these forbidden spells, but those thousands of cultivators had it easy for no reason. As it turns out, they were all hiding here to recuperate. From the looks of it, I'm afraid more than half of them have died." Seeing the strange expression on Xiaohua's face, Xue Xue seemed to understand what Xiaohua was thinking. Looking at everyone's gaze sweeping over, Xue Xue lightly touched Xiaohua's arm with her elbow, indicating that Xiaohua should restrain himself a bit. "And let's go over there to adjust our breathing." Xiaohua naturally understood. He pointed at the open space beside the stone wall, and the two of them slowly walked over. When everyone saw that the two of them were similarly injured, their gazes also moved away, and they minded their own business to recover. Xue Xue looked at Xiaohua pretending to adjust his breathing and secretly laughed in her heart. She put the parasol dragon pill into her mouth and took out her own medicinal pill, preparing to continue after taking the parasol dragon pill. However, when the medicinal liquid of the parasol dragon pill merged into her meridians and began to slowly repair the damaged meridians just now, Xue Xue was dumbfounded. She couldn't help but exclaim in her heart, "A supreme-grade spirit pill? This parasol dragon pill, when did it have the effect of repairing meridians? This sweetheart." When the medicinal power began to stabilize and repair her meridians, Xue Xue couldn't help but open her eyes a bit. Looking at the solemn Xiaohua beside her, a trace of sweetness appeared in her heart. He definitely didn't want me to know that this was a supreme-grade spirit pill and was afraid that I would refuse. So he deliberately deceived me. Would I refuse? How could Xiaohua know what Xue Xue was thinking? Feeling that someone was watching him, he also opened his eyes. When Xue Xue saw Xiaohua open his eyes, she immediately closed her eyes again, leaving a trace of red on her face. That trace of red on Xue Xue's snow-white face was so obvious. Eh, could it be? There's a problem? Xiaohua saw that Xue Xue's complexion wasn't good and was slightly shocked. However, looking at Xue Xue, other than her face being a bit red, everything else was normal. It didn't seem like there was a problem. He didn't know that in just a day's time, Xue Xue's impression of him had completely changed. In fact, when he thought about it, two strangers who knew each other and fell in love, who could clearly distinguish which day was the key to the change. At this moment, the group of cultivators that had arrived earlier began to make some noise. Xiaohua wasn't injured, so he stood up and looked over. He saw that among these cultivators, there were about 10 high-level cultivators at the 11th level of qi refining gradually gathering together. Around these cultivators, there were several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining who also surrounded them, as if they were discussing something. The other cultivators all stood up and watched from the side. After a long while, they seemed to have come to a conclusion. The 10 or so cultivators at the 11th level of qi refining dispersed and gave orders to the several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining. The several tens of cultivators at the 10th level of qi refining then walked towards the other cultivators. Among them, a cultivator who was about 30 years old saw Xiaohua and walked over. -6, you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.